Hi, guys. We've got a minute or two before the afternoon session begins. Messenger audio. Hang on just one second. The thing to remember as we go into the afternoon session, what we're going to be looking for is where DPD will be shifting, where the general funds are funds that can be clawed or can be redistributed for general purposes, including safety. So I'm very curious to see where money is going to be shifted that could be potentially reallocated to pay DPD to do things, meaning like in part embedded in these budget cuts everywhere is still cash that could flow back to DPD. And I would like, that's based on Gilmore's question at the end of the first session. And now that I'm cued in, I'm not going to be tuning out. But I am going to be stepping aside for just 1 second to play Protest Mom to someone I care about while they have their online hearing. And I will be back to not to demystify this Carrie Joy, but to decode the nonsense that we hear. Stay tuned. I'm here, babe.
And let's have folks introduce themselves, and I'm going to go very easily in order of district number, starting with District 1 with Councilwoman Sandoval. Make it easy on everybody.
Hi, dear. It's easy on everyone but me, Kevin Flynn. So I would have to go first. Amanda Sandoval, Northwest Denver, District 1.
Jamie Torres, Council District 3. Amanda Sawyer, District 5.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Paul Kashmann, South Denver, District 6.
Good afternoon, Joel Clark, District 7.
Good afternoon, Chris Herndon, District 8.
Good afternoon, District 9, Candy Sadevaca.
Good afternoon, Stacy Gilmore, District 11.
Good afternoon, Deborah Ortega, City Council at Large.
Thank you. I'm looking at the names. I don't see Councilwoman Kenichi on here yet. I just spoke with Councilman Hines from District 10. He's going to be a few minutes late. So we are going to hear, I think, first from Eric Haraga. Why don't we just jump right into it and use our time efficiently? Eric, I looked over the presentation and I'm ready to go with it if everyone else is.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, Council President Gilmore, Chairman Flynn, and members of Denver City Council, Mayor Hancock, and cabinet officials. And of course, thank you.
I'm sorry, Eric. Is the mayor here?
Oh, I don't. Maybe he isn't. I just assumed you were. Yeah.
Okay, I don't see him. All right, go ahead.
And thank you, Brendan, and your team really for conducting a disciplined but nimble process during these challenging times. We actually rehearsed this presentation today, and we were able to keep it to 50 minutes to leave you for ample time for questions. So we'll try our best to hit that target today.
Okay, and you just used 2 minutes explaining that to us. So
okay. We have here today with our executive leadership team, as well as directors of our divisions to answer any specific questions you may have. And thank you. I think we'll move on to the next slide. So really our vision is to lead an inclusive and innovative economy for all Denver residents, businesses, and neighborhoods. Obviously, we are now in a very different place than we were 6 months ago. But what has remained consistent and has become even more relevant is our focus on equity. We have 5 major focus areas supported by the executive office. Each division leader will be taking you through their mission and budget. So with business development, global business development, workforce development, you will hear from Deborah Kashmann, our Chief Business Development Officer. For the Division of Small Business Opportunity, you will hear from Director Gina Gibson. The Neighborhood Equity and Stabilization team is led by Director Irene Aguilar. And our executive team, which supports all these divisions through strategic planning, contracting, government affairs, day-to-day operations, communications, and external affairs, led by our Chief of Staff, Jen Morris, and our COO and Head of Finance, Matthew Carnes. In addition to our senior staff, they're on standby to this call. I would say in 2020, we played a significant role in providing immediate economic relief to the Denver community at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, while also staying focused on traditional economic development community supports. While equity was at the forefront of our work prior to COVID, you will see during our presentation today that we have an increased emphasis on rebuilding our economy in an inclusive and equitable way. So when looking at our 2021 budget, we use the city's primary guiding questions to ensure that any reductions to our budget and our current programming supports the most under-resourced and historically marginalized communities in Denver. As you will hear throughout our presentation, we made sure that we are not cutting services to the populations listed on this page. In terms of identifying unintended consequences within the proposed budget, we identified additional spending cuts amongst our division, but due to our focus on equity and serving vulnerable populations, we were able to preserve our core programs and FTEs. In addition, we were able to identify federal funds to help offset general fund reduction impacts. I'd like to point out also, DITO is also taking another step in taking a look at policies that are currently in place that may have a negative impact on marginalized communities and perpetuate systemic racism. And we will make recommendations on how we can emerge from this current recession with equity in mind. Next page, please. So here are just some of the examples of our divisions and how we are specifically targeting vulnerable businesses, job seekers, and neighborhoods. Our Business Development Office works to attract, retain, and expand businesses in Denver to create jobs and expand our tax base. As you will hear today from Deborah Kashmann, many of our programs serve the minority community, and we have a concerted effort to support them by prioritizing micro businesses and neighborhoods most vulnerable to involuntary displacement. In terms of global business development, we work to attract international businesses, which add cultural, linguistic, and economic diversity to our city, attracting foreign direct investment to our community, and enhancing relationships with the global community brings investment, innovation, high-wage jobs, and demonstrates the inclusive and welcoming spirit of our city. Our workforce services team has programs focused on veterans, TANF recipients, people experiencing homelessness, foster care history, youth, and our targeted neighborhoods. Our division of small business opportunity exists to support minority and women-owned businesses and help them get certified with the city, make connections, and bid on city contracts. NEST works specifically on empowering under-resourced and marginalized residents and businesses in neighborhoods across Denver that have been identified as high risk for involuntary displacement. So next slide, I will hand it off to Deborah Kashmann, our Chief Business Development Officer, responsible for business development, global business, and workforce development. Thank you.
Thank you. And before Deborah starts, I want to welcome Mayor Hancock to the matrix of faces or names on our screen. Welcome, Mayor. Thank you. Deborah, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Eric, and good afternoon, council members, and also Mayor Hancock and my fellow city colleagues. It's really good to be with you this afternoon to share a little bit more about our work in business development, global business development, and workforce development. Next slide, please. Our work in business development and global business development really falls into three main buckets, and you see those highlighted here by the blue bars. One is supporting business recruitment, retention, and expansion. Second is assisting small businesses and entrepreneurs. And third, under the global business development bucket, is building Denver's capacity to engage in global markets. We've listed some of our signature programs under each of those buckets. And I'd also like to let you know that in a normal year, and we're by no means in a normal year this year, our business and global teams would work with around 1,500 distinct companies, providing everything from business consulting services to linking them with very specific programs like grants, loans, tax credit programs, workforce services, enterprise zones, site selection services, etc. I'd also like to stress that approximately 80% of our staff's time is spent working with micro and small businesses that are located here in Denver and with entrepreneurs that are seeking to start a business here in our community. But I also wanted to let you know that since we're not in a normal year, since March, our team has pivoted to provide urgent emergency support to our small businesses to help them survive and retain as many jobs as possible. I do want to spend a couple of minutes to focus on one or two of these programs that you see represented on the screen. The first one I would like to point out is our Small Business Revolving Loan Program. This program is funded with Community Development Block Grant Program, with block grant funds, and it's a gap financing tool. We typically provide 25%, can provide 25% of support for project costs. We do have the ability to go up to 50% if the project is located in one of our targeted neighborhoods. Over the last 3 years, we've made 15 loans from this program, and 10 of these loans have gone to women and minority-owned businesses. So this really is a program that we feel meets a unique gap. The second, Ivana, can you go back a couple of slides? There. Also wanted to call out a couple of our global business development initiatives. I think I would like to let you know that our global business development work is really important. It's critical for both bringing new companies and jobs to Denver from foreign companies, but it's also about opening up global opportunities for our existing business community that's already here in Denver. Many of our local businesses are competing on a global stage, and they appreciate the work the city is doing and opening doors for them around the world. When COVID hit, our global team really exemplified the spirit of innovation and how they reinvented the work that they were doing. Since the pandemic started, our global team has been hosting bi-weekly calls with the Colorado Consular Corps. These are members of the diplomatic community who represent diverse communities, including immigrants and refugees. And these calls have helped to strengthen relationships with these key strategic partners. I think we can all have empathy for if you weren't born in this country, but you happen to be in our city when the pandemic hit, about how scary that could be. And these bi-weekly calls have really been critical to provide good information to our colleagues from around the world. And while we haven't been able to host foreign delegations in Denver in person, our global business development team has facilitated a meaningful virtual celebration with Denver's sister city, Takayama. This was our 60th year, and in Japan, 60th is a very relevant number. So we were able to celebrate with them virtually this year, thanks to the work of our global business development team. Next slide. A couple more highlights from our work here in 2020. I'll start with the business development bucket. As you all are well aware, we launched the Small Business Emergency Relief Grant Program, and to date, we've spent $7.3 million with this program, providing awards to almost 1,100 companies. Just this week, we sent surveys out to all the firms who have received these small grants to help understand the impact that these funds have had on their businesses, and to also get a sense of what struggles they continue to have so we can use this data to inform our future recovery strategy. DITA is also distributing 4,000 PPE kits to small businesses and nonprofits around our community. And we've also deferred the loan payments for 14 of our small business loan companies, providing them a limited time to defer these payments to help them weather the storm. And yes, despite all our efforts around emergency support, our efforts continue around business retention and attraction efforts, working with business prospects, including large corporations and startups looking to land in Denver and the United States. Moving over to the global bucket, I'll start with the global landing pad. Normally, this would be an event that we would host folks into Denver the week before Denver Startup Week kicks off. Not being able to do that, obviously, for this year, our global team created a virtual global landing pad program, and classes and sessions have been held over several weeks for 15 companies from seven different countries to help them understand the dynamics of the Denver market and also how to successfully launch here in Denver. These sessions have featured speakers from across Denver and around Colorado, and several of the participating companies have already made commitments to open in Denver once we get past the pandemic, and some are already hiring staff here in Denver for their operations. We also continue to ink cities-to-city agreements with other globally minded cities who are agreeing to partner with us to help us both with our growing startup firms. Later in October, we'll ink a city-to-city agreement with Sydney, Australia. Our global business team also continues to work with a significant number of prospects from 12 countries around the globe that have expressed an interest in learning more about Denver. And in 2020, our global business development team reinvigorated our foreign trade zone, which not only works for Denver, but also helps the region as well. Next slide. Moving on to our Denver Workforce Services. The services that our Workforce Services team really falls into two buckets: services for job seekers and services for employers who are needing to find talent. I wanted to let you know that when our labor market experiences such an abrupt shock as what we have experienced this year, seeing well over 80,000 Denver residents filing for unemployment benefits within just a couple of short months, our public workforce system becomes more important than ever, and our team is stepping up to serve the need. I'd like to take a moment and just provide some context and to illustrate the magnitude of the situation that we're dealing with. So in a normal year, our workforce services folks would work with about 23,000 people. This would be 23,000 individuals that would register with our system. And we would end up providing direct one-on-one services to at least 4,000 unique individuals. Last program year, which did conclude and at the end of June and was impacted by the pandemic, our system registered more than 40,000 people and provided services to over 7,000 unique individuals. So normal year, 23,000 people. Last year, just touched on the pandemic, 40,000 people. Normal year, 4,000 unique staff-assisted services. Last year, 7,000 unique staff-assisted services. And with our program year that began July 1, in just the first two and a half months of this program, we've already eclipsed the numbers that we typically see in a normal year. In just 2.5 months, we've had 29,000 job seekers register with our system, and we have provided individual services to over 5,500 individuals who've engaged with our workforce team. So you begin to understand the magnitude that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis and really what lies before us. I also wanted to let you know that most of our workforce services are funded with federal and state funding streams. The Special Revenue Fund and General Fund dollars really only touch a small portion of our workforce programs, and those are the summer youth programs, and of course our newly created Denver Construction Career Program. We operate 3 workforce centers: Westside, Montbello, and one at the airport, and these centers serve both job seekers and employers. When COVID hit, our team immediately shifted to delivering services virtually. And from March until June, we hosted over 160 virtual events, engaged over 4,300 individuals, and worked with over 1,000 businesses. Now, beginning in July, we have reopened our workforce centers. Each center is open 1 day a week for appointments, services by appointment only, and those will be adjusted based on the demand for appointments. We are also doing curbside enrollments by appointment if folks aren't comfortable coming into the centers, but they need to stop by and drop off documentation. Earlier this year, we did select a new partner for our adult programs. After a lengthy RFPs process, we selected Eckerd Services, which is a national nonprofit. They have been onboarded, they've hired staff, and they are delivering services to our residents of Denver. As the mayor mentioned in his budget, the city will be accelerating $170 million in projects through the Elevate Denver bond program. And our Denver Construction Careers Pilot will be working with these projects to integrate workforce requirements around ensuring that these opportunities are provided to Denver residents to work on these contracts, both in employment, apprenticeship opportunities, and training opportunities. We are now 1.5 years into our Denver Construction Career Project, and we're learning with every project, and we think it's going to be a very successful program for the future. I'd like to wrap up our workforce services slide by letting you know that one of the newer initiatives that we're working on is called a Good Job Strategy. This came out of a recommendation from our ERRC committee, and we've been discovering best practices around this work by engaging with organizations across the United States. We will be licensing a tool which will customize based on our Denver labor market, which will help us assess and evaluate what a good job is. I look forward to sharing with you additional information as we move further along the pathway of this good job strategy. Next slide, please. And here we get to the change request that you'll see reflected for the business development, global business development, and workforce division. We'll be reducing our business incentive fund by $200,000. We're reducing our professional services budget by a little over $50,000. We're reducing our budget for travel and sponsorships by close to $35,000. And you will see one expansion request for business support for the 16th Street Mall construction project. And if we can get the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about that. So when we think about the 16th Street Mall and the construction project that will start in the coming year, we ask you to keep in mind that almost all of these businesses have already been significantly impacted by the pandemic and the public health requirements that they have had to operate under. Let's also remember that most of these businesses employ many of our most marginalized and low-wage citizens, restaurant workers, and retail workers. This construction project will be a second serious impact to them in less than a year, so we need to do everything we can to help these businesses survive and to retain the jobs that they do have. And looking at the businesses who are directly located on the 16th Street Mall, we've come to realize that close to 50% of these businesses are locally owned. I'll also let you know that at the time of unprecedented unemployment, the 16th Street Mall will support nearly 1,500 jobs, and the majority of these jobs will be in skilled trades, including hundreds of apprenticeship and job training opportunities for Denver residents. This project will include workforce requirements that the Denver Construction Career Pilot Project will set, which will hopefully provide hundreds of opportunities for people who may be out of work currently or may need a job to continue to provide for their families. As you know, our Denver Construction Career Pilot focuses on involving and getting folks from like veterans, people who've experienced homelessness, people who have been recipients of public and federal benefits, and young adults exiting the foster care system and the justice involved. It really focuses on getting those into construction trades so that they can get on a career pathway in construction. So our services that we would expect to provide with this $300,000 really range across 4 efforts. First and foremost is small business stabilization, and this effort will really.
But how small are they if they can afford to be on 16th Street Mall? I have a small business.
Service could also help us identify
gaps from my
in
home.
the tenant mix and help reimagine new employment and tax generation opportunities on the mall. We'll also be working closely to help prepare companies for the construction process. This will include hosting seminars, developing materials to help businesses understand what steps they can take before construction starts to help them weather the construction project more easily. This will be, talking with them about how to manage their financing, maybe getting a line of credit, how to manage their inventory, merchandising, marketing, how to collect customer information so you can continue to communicate with customers during the construction process. And lastly, we'll be looking at designing and implementing an Open for Business campaign, which would be including signage to indicate what businesses are remaining open during the construction process. Next slide. So here you can see a version of the combined business development and global business development budget as portrayed in the budget book you received earlier this week. And next. And my last slide in each of the divisions will include a slide such as this to indicate what kind of mitigating actions we're taking so that we can continue to deliver services to the residents of Denver. So while we're still in the pandemic part of the pandemic, we will continue to leverage as virtual capabilities to the extent that we can for our business development, business attraction, business recruitment, business services, as well as our workforce opportunities. And because we are, due to budget cuts, we'll be losing a few of our data sources that we use to help us identify leads and growing companies and research companies. We will be relying a greater extent on publicly available data sources. And in terms of the budget framework, we'll continue to partner with NEST, other city agencies, and first and foremost, community stakeholders so that we can continue to implement culturally responsive programs that seek to reduce economic equity gaps and increase opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses and marginalized and disadvantaged groups and communities. I'd also like to indicate, while it's not on this slide, but one of the things that we do know and realize that with the magnitude of the unemployment situation that we're facing, that many of these job seekers maybe have barriers looking for jobs, finding jobs, participating in training programs because they don't have a computer or they don't have Wi-Fi access. So we will be utilizing some of the federal resources to provide computer hardware and Wi-Fi access to hopefully over 750 people in the coming weeks. So we do think that that's another equity framework strategy that we an issue we've addressed and that we are doing something to try and resolve. And with that, I will turn it over to Adrena Gibson, who will take you through the DSBO programs.
Thank you, Adrena. Welcome. And before you start, I want to welcome Councilman Hines also to the meeting. He joined.
Welcome, Hines.
10 minutes. Welcome, Councilman Hines. Adrena, go ahead.
Alrighty. Good afternoon, council members and Mayor Hancock. Again, my name is Adrena Gibson. I'm the director of the Division of Small Business Opportunity. I'm glad to be here with you to share important information related to DSBO, our budget submission, and change requests. It is our charge to be the bridge that promotes and improves the participation and engagement of small businesses through the creation and implementation of programs, thereby achieving an equitable Denver economy.
Yeah, so, I'm wondering how many businesses are actually that small.
Creates and expands contracting opportunities for small, minority, and women-owned businesses in Denver through our three social and economic disadvantaged small business programs. So that's the MWB,
I'm giving all this side
SBE, and DBE
Sounds
programs.
Good.
Assigning business utilization
saying the right thing and doing the right thing, not the same thing, right, Democrats?
More commonly referred to as our defined pool and the goals program for certified disadvantaged businesses. Conducting compliance oversight after these projects have established programs attached. Building capacity and fostering relationships for small businesses through technical assistance programs, i.e. Bridging the Gap, Mentor Protege. And last but not least, staying connected to our community through diligent outreach efforts, training, and networking opportunities. To that end, in 2020, we were intentionally focused on the ordinance reauthorization, and I thank you again for all of your support, council members and mayor. the rules and regulations, and developing standard operating procedures. These areas are the foundation to building a pathway for our small business community now more than ever. We also developed a COVID technical assistance program for certified small, minority, and women-owned businesses with 2 city partners, the Office of Financial Empowerment and DIN's Commerce Hub. This program focuses on addressing emergent needs of disadvantaged businesses that include financial services, legal consultation, resource navigation, technology training during these harsh times. This program will roll out this fall, which we're really excited about. We also launched our citywide Mentor Protege program, whereby we enrolled 6 pairings with diverse backgrounds in industry disciplines. Along with our city agency leads, the pairings have been very diligent with their development goals and their Mentor Protege plans. We look forward to having our next round of enrollments in 2021 and building on this program. We also partnered on the Leading Edge program with CDOT, the Department of Transportation, as well as the Small Business Development Center. This is a 9-week business development course to help small business owners become more competitive in construction and the transportation industry. We actually have our next class tonight. And very excitingly, we launched the Payment Alert and Investigation Desk, Get Paid. This is our prompt payment complaint and inquiry portal for certified small businesses experiencing payment issues with their primes. This allows DISBO to go in and do the research and resolve any issues related to contractor prompt pay. Switching gears just a bit, and as it relates to the graph on the right, this reflects the number of awards going to small businesses as well as projected payments being made to our mission that I shared a few slides back. The 2 should always be going in an upward trend. If you take a look at 2021, we anticipate a great number of awards and payments going out to our small business community. And for example, as the mayor and Dottie mentioned previously, earlier today, the city will be accelerating $170 million in projects through the Elevate Bond program. DISBO has already begun working closely to ensure that minority and women-owned businesses have the opportunity to work on these projects. This means more aggressive and attainable goals for subcontracting opportunities, as well as more defined pool projects for small businesses to actually prime these projects. We'll also have the convention center work ramping up, which equates to more MWBE subcontracts being executed, and other noteworthy projects like 56th Avenue, ProSoc, livestock, janitorial services, and parking management, which we anticipate a great deal of MWBE participation. There will also be new contracting opportunities with general services. Since removing covered goods and services, this is opening up a lot of opportunities for our small businesses. As such, we will assist in ensuring small businesses have the preparation, information, and opportunity to bid in this upcoming year, regardless of any reductions. Slide, please. This brings us to our reductions. While a 100K reduction is reflected here, I would like for everyone to please rest assured we will have funds remaining to assist in capacity building efforts, and DISBO has been combining resources and innovative solutions to roll out assistance to our disadvantaged community. For one, DISBO and city agencies have been demonstrating coordination efforts, as you've seen through the ordinance reauthorization and this new COVID technical assistance program. DISBO is and will also continue to partner with other municipalities, as we are doing with the CDOT and City Leading Edge collaboration. And then 3, DISBO will also refer the community to existing and upcoming DIDO programs and services, as you just heard from Deborah Cameron. A bit more on this. In 2021, we will actually expand our capacity building efforts. We plan to, and have already begun developing and facilitating external small business certification training modules, like benefits of getting certified, how to get certified, etc. Developing and facilitating external contractor training modules, how to comply with the MWBE program, prompt pay, etc. We're also developing a small business graduation program for businesses that exceed the size standard. We'll be also going into our mentor protege year 2. And then lastly, we will see additional initiatives that we anticipate will spur out of the business equity leadership team in the 2021's master utilization plans. So with this assessment and partnership, we found it most appropriate to reduce our capacity building funds to assist with recovery efforts. Slide, please. Next up, as you know, airports around the world were hit hard. DIN was definitely without exception. To that end, I do want to make the point as you look at this list of reductions, because it may seem as though we are getting less, but over the last couple of years, DISBO has actually had an opportunity to ramp up hiring through additional FTE and funding for services and travel for training. So with this understanding, DISBO wanted to be sure to do our part to help reduce the airport revenue hit and help with their recovery plan. So taking a deeper look into these reductions, you'll see the reduction of 2 FTE of future positions, not existing employees. Just want to reiterate that it's reduction of 2 FTE of future positions, not existing employees. Through our diligent work to rewrite the rules and regulations and developing the standard operating procedures, our work is better streamlined, allowing us to balance out our workload. We've also had a reduction in system enhancements, and this is due to comprehensive work that we're currently doing with our system provider to identify how to optimize the modules that we currently have and where we can enhance without a budget hit. And then lastly, we've had a reduction in travel. We found this was appropriate as we've been conducting a lot of virtual training classes, as well as our staff attending conferences and trainings virtually. So for both DIN and downtown, we have taken a close look at what we could do with existing resources and how to brace for impact in 2021. So we will still have much to come that won't impact the 2021 budget. And just taking a closer look into our compliance and systems, we've begun advancing compliance tracking and reporting systems. So we've been optimizing that, as I had shared earlier. We have that Get Paid dispute portal. We're integrating our 3 service providers, Jagger, Workday, and B2G better and more effectively. And then on the other side, with certification and outreach, we're building a train the trainer program so that all of the information is consistent, current, and correct for our staff. And then we'll continue to do target outreach programs citywide, like Bridging the Gap and how to do business with the city. Slide, please.
I can take
Here you can see a version of the DISBO budget as portrayed in the budget book that you received earlier this week. You'll note some movement of DIN personnel and expenses that have been transitioned below to a special revenue fund.
All right, let me.
This again is not impacting existing staff. It's just a transition movement.
All right, I'll be down in just a second.
Slide, please. And then as shared throughout this presentation, I hope that you've heard the mitigating actions that we've been deliberately working on. To reiterate, it's partnering for programming opportunities on capacity building and development needs of disadvantaged businesses. We're expanding our resources to cast a larger network and to bring more folks in helping with our efforts towards small businesses. We're leveraging what we can do in this virtual world for our disadvantaged businesses, and we're streamlining our processes and technology systems to more productively shift weight off of staff workload and to continue to provide the same level of services.
I am going to have to go talk about that, but I'm going to leave the stream running so you guys
program continues to grow with the update
can watch this here.
Updated ordinance reauthorization.
Well, if I see if I can find someone else to help make commentary.
The 2021 budget will still allow us to focus on equity, effectuate and propel the program through internal process improvements, and promote opportunities for our certified businesses. Slide, please. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Irene Aguilar.
Thank you, Senator. Before you start, I want to welcome Council members Kendra Black and Robin Knich to the meeting. And I think we are all in attendance here. Senator, go ahead.
Thank you, Councilman Flynn, council people, and Mayor Hancock for being here for this presentation today. As you know, NEST is a relatively new division within DIDO, and our mission is to support our neighborhoods that are experiencing significant change to elevate their voices in determining the future of their community by empowering these under-resourced and marginalized residents and businesses. And what you'll hear about today is a lot of our focus being on assisting community leaders in organizing and developing their own powerful local community voice. And until for those neighborhoods that don't have that yet, we're going to be listening to the community and ensuring that their needs and desires are shared with the correct agencies within the city. We are really striving to be driven by what the community directs and wants to see us do. I wanted to start by just reminding you that NEST has actually only been in existence for 2 years, started with a team of one, me, in October of 2018. As a team of one, I spent many months listening to residents, businesses, city departments, and nonprofit agencies working in our communities that were most at risk for displacement to understand what and how the city and county of Denver might help stabilize our communities. In March of 2019, DIDO's neighborhoods team was added to NEST. That was a team of 7, providing access to HUD's Community Development Block Grant funding. We worked as a team to identify priority areas for our 2020 funding. We chose to focus on working to narrow the income inequality that exists in our city by helping to set our residents up to build wealth through things like youth engagement and enrichment programs, employment and training programs, support for micro businesses and contracting, and as well with a company to provide education and training on how you could form cooperatives. Our CDBG PF&I funds were also used. These are funds we get to help with public facilities and improvements, to help a Southwest Denver food bank purchase its building. And we worked with the Denver Housing Authority to establish a food resource in Sun Valley. We are in discussions with other communities serving health facilities and employment training facilities for purchases in 2021. In February of 2020, NEST expanded again by adding members of the former North Denver Cornerstone Collaborative. And in April, we had a new program manager come to our team so that we are now a strong team of 10. The addition of the staff from NDCC allowed us to learn from their experiences in GES and develop plans to expand on the interventions that were most useful to the community. With this new staff, our ability to focus on improving outcomes for our micro businesses and for our youth was also increased dramatically. Next slide. Thank you. So NEST works to create opportunities for our businesses and residents in our neighborhoods experiencing change. As I mentioned, we use our community development block grant funding, and through this we actually support 5 business support entities in our some of our most vulnerable communities. Mi Casa helps businesses citywide. The FEX partnership is in East Colfax. The Buku West is in Westwood. News Ed focuses on West Denver, and the Foundation for Black Entrepreneurship, which provides support for African American businesses. We also fund youth programming, including programs like ELK, Girls Inc., Florence Crittenden, and Groundwork Denver. And then we provide employment and training support. A new partner this year is the Center for African American Health, which has a new building in the Northeast Park Hill community. We work with Mile High Ministries and Lutheran Social Services to help women who are victims of domestic violence and immigrants. And then we also work with La Raza Services on criminal justice reemployment. And then as mentioned previously, we also fund Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center through our CDBG to provide education and support for conversion of businesses to cooperatives. We are building on the strength and capacity of our business support organizations by connecting them to each other and to the contractor who's been working in GES to share resources and best practices for digital presence. We will also be working with the Foundation for Black Entrepreneurship to identify and nurture BSO partnerships in Montbello and Northeast Park Hill. Our NEST staff participate regularly in community meetings in support of our target communities. We have established strong partnerships with activist community groups and organizations in our communities in that, for example, we worked with the GES Coalition to support their successful application for an equitable development grant through CDPHE. I serve on their advisory committee for that. We worked with the East Colfax Community Collaborative to coordinate weekend and evening multilingual and multicultural meetings with Community Planning and Development, hosts, the Office of Financial Empowerment, and Dito Business Services to listen to their feedback and support in the East Area Plan. NEST will actually continue to support the East Colfax Community Collective as they prioritize the action items that they want to move forward in their community in the years ahead. We worked with the Sun Valley Community Coalition to provide access to resources and supports needed for the development of their community benefits agreement with the Stadium District. We have funded microbusiness digital support for 10 businesses in GES, and we will be updating and disseminating this support amongst all of our communities in 2021. We are partnering with Mikasa in the FACTS partnership. We applied for a Chase Advancing Cities grant application, which unfortunately we again just made it to the semifinals on. But during the course of this, the applicants, Mikasa and the FACTS partnership, were able to convene a meeting with the heads of Community Planning and Development, hosts, and the Office of Financial Empowerment to discuss the proposal on mitigating involuntary displacement as a model in East Colfax to disseminate throughout the community. We are in conversations with this group on business support continuing through DITO funding since the Advancing Cities grant was not successful. With the addition of Dr. Nancy Hernandez from NDCC to our team, we were able to add 3 young women from GES to our team who are being mentored and supported in providing paid work for the city and county of Denver in partnership with CareerWise. We're enhancing the quality of the CareerWise program while expanding the communities served beyond GES in 2021. NEST actually reviews all rezoning applications and meets regularly with Community Planning and Development and hosts to see if there might be an opportunity to negotiate a development agreement. We review all excise and license applications to be sure that our target neighborhood connections are aware of new marijuana or alcohol sales facilities applications in our community and are aware of the Good Neighbor Agreement process in case they want to activate that. In addition, NEST leads a group with representatives from about 25 organizations across the city that meet regularly as the Anti-Displacement Policy Network, where we discuss strategy, potential policy changes to prevent displacement. We also host a much smaller group focused on business displacement. We're working with the Center for Community Wealth Building and the Denver Anchor Network to promote an anchor mission across the city. This month, NEST launched a new multi-department investment impact committee to ensure proactive interventions to stabilize communities where capital projects are being planned. We will be looking at the 13th Avenue improvements near the Stadium District. We're looking at the new Westwood Rec Center, and finally at the BRT project in East Colfax. NEST participates in interagency collaborative efforts with hosts, Community Planning and Development, the Office of Social Equity and Innovation, and others to align along common metrics and indicators of equity and inform our strategy with data-driven approaches. We recently distributed about $85,000 through our Denver Foundation's Strengthening Neighborhoods grant program to provide funding for small community-driven projects designed to create stronger and more connected neighborhoods and to address community needs. The projects such as murals, free libraries, meal distribution, community food share, and community engagement and outreach were funded. And often this is people's first step into trying to get organized and activated to improve their community. And then finally, in response to COVID, the NEST team has been responsible for supporting the food banks in the EOC. We were able to partner to arrange for over 1,000 boxes of fresh produce to be distributed weekly for 12 weeks to some of our communities of color. We contracted with the Colorado Sewing Coalition to support employment of women who were displaced by COVID, and they created 4,000 protective masks, which were distributed at no cost to the community. We distributed $2 million in nonprofit emergency relief grants. We're in the process of evaluating applicants for micro business support targeted to just our most at-risk NEST neighborhoods. And we are also right now in the process of contracting with some known community leaders in our NEST neighborhoods on the ground to provide both resident and business support in ensuring that they're aware of all the regulations and benefits available for them through the government or other organizations and able to apply to maximize their business and personal possibilities during this pandemic. Next slide. Sorry that was so long, but I really wanted you to learn about everything that NEST has been working on. Because of the focus of NEST on equity and preventing displacement, I want to thank the mayor and the budget office for recommending that we not decrease NEST budget. And in fact, on the next slide, you'll see that NEST budget and staffing capacity will be increased. Part of this is a reflection of our adding of the NDCC staff, but as you'll see, our services and supplies funding is going to be significantly increased. And I wanted to let you know that in addition to continuing to offer mini grants, we are and working on potentially expanding our career-wise participation. We hope to ensure that we have better business support in the Global and Elyria Swansea neighborhoods, as well as in South Federal for our Vietnamese community. And we're also hoping to continue to support community leaders as they develop throughout the city. I did want to let you know with regards to successes in that in East Colfax, Councilwoman Sawyer, the East Colfax Community Collective was chosen by the Colorado Trust for a Building Bridges to Power grant. And we will be working to support them through that growth. And the FACTS partnership is entering into a partnership with the Colorado Health Foundation to look at procuring land and finding out from the community what kinds of developments would be most beneficial to them, and hopefully evolving to become a community development corporation to continue to support East Colfax through times of change. The citywide connections and partnerships that have been developed over the past 2 years will be strengthened and expanded to include more work with our council district offices in 2021 in areas that are at risk for displacement. Next slide. As an expanded, dedicated team, we worked to develop a meaningful strategic plan that places our work emphasis on empowering our communities. Our 3 areas of focus are partnering with the city and community stakeholders to implement culturally responsive programs that narrow the social and economic equity gaps in our prioritized neighborhoods, bridging the economic equity gaps by investing in culturally responsive direct services within our prioritized neighborhoods, and supporting individuals and community organizations to make community-driven change within our prioritized neighborhoods. I welcome your feedback and suggestions for ways in which we can continue to enhance the impact of our work in NEST, and I want to thank you for your support of our program. I'll now turn this over to Jen Morris, our new Chief of Staff in our Executive Office. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And Jen, before you begin, we kind of set aside an hour for this. We have 10 minutes to go to an hour. So if you could
It'll be brief.
speed up.
We'll speed it up. Thank you so much. And in interest of speeding it up, I think we can go right to the next slide. So the executive office supports all of DUDO's work behind the scenes and directly with the mayor's office, other agencies, external stakeholders, and community partners, including strategic planning, marketing, communications, outreach, finance, contracting, employee engagement, policy, data and reporting, and government relations. And all of these functions are critical to support DUDO's efforts to stabilize and rebuild Denver's economy. I'm not going to go too much into detail about our highlights because we just did a pretty lengthy presentation to City Council recently with the Economic Relief and Recovery Council. In addition to that, the management and the deployment of the $11 million in local and federal coronavirus relief funds is what we've been working on, as well as working on development of a longer term strategy for equitable economic recovery. Next slide, please. Thank you. When looking at our executive team budget, it's worth noting that 70% is for personnel, including salaries and benefits. So we didn't have a lot of places to cut. We are proposing a reduction of 3 FTEs totaling $477,000, including salary and benefits, and another $50,000 from professional services, which is typically used for some on-call or contract work as needed. We do have one expansion within this office for $250,000 for the Aerotropolis Development Phase 3. Next slide. Eric Carraga is going to talk a little bit about this, Aerotropolis.
Sure. In 2016, the 1988 IGA that created the airport was amended and approved by voters of each jurisdiction, which was really, the purpose was for land use and infrastructure efforts, coordination in and around the airport to create market development opportunities on and around the airport, and creating a tax sharing mechanism for future development on airport. Working with the Aerotropolis Regional Committee, as you see the members there, we are now in phase 3 of marketing plan. The primary deliverables for this phase of work is to develop and launch a website and market the Aerotropolis region with an account-based marketing strategy. And we have over 7,000 firms that we are targeting that was identified in our phase 2 study. So the $250,000 budget increase or expansion represents 25% of the total contract value, half of which DEN is contributing, and 50% is by our neighboring Aerotropolis Regional Committee jurisdictions. So I'll flip it back to Jen.
Next slide. Thank you, Eric. You can see here our executive budget that you received in the budget book. And really the net change is about $89,166 year over year, which includes the 4 reductions, 1 expansion request, as well as some adjustments to the overall increase. Next slide. So as I mentioned, our reductions were primarily in personnel. So in order to mitigate any negative effects to our service delivery with these reductions, we have first and foremost realigned the current staff roles to fill those service gaps. We're going to utilize the remaining dollars to outsource specific project needs. For example, instead of hiring a full-time economist, which is a position that we gave up, we will engage on an on-call basis as needed. And the other duties that this role previously filled has already been redistributed throughout Edo. Additionally, the marketing role was not completely eliminated from our office. However, we are not using general fund dollars for this, as we'll leverage federal funds for this position. And then regarding our approach to equity, from a communication standpoint, we're ensuring that our external communications and outreach is delivered in a culturally relevant manner. This is really important, I think, across the city, and has definitely been a focus for Edo this year and will be next year. For example, for the PPE program, we translated the promotional materials and the registration forms online into Spanish and Vietnamese. And I think more importantly, not that we launched them at the same time as the English version. So we treated them just as important as going out in English and not weeks later, like some other programs have been in the past. So this really is a priority for us to make sure that we have things in language. And then also we're partnering with NEST and the other community organizations who can get out there, help us with the outreach to these small businesses and residents in corridors that are harder to reach. They're not watching mainstream media or have language barriers otherwise. So, excuse me. As previously mentioned, we're also focusing our efforts on how to rebuild our economy without leaving any Denverites behind. Eric's going to talk a little bit about that later, but right now I'm just going to toss it over to Matthew to talk about our overall budget in more detail.
Well, hey, thank you, Jen. Thank you all. Good afternoon. Knowing that we need to brush through this, I just wanted to make sure that you all had a summary view of how our budget looks. I know everybody had gone over their individual change requests and reductions, but what you see in front of you is really just the holistic picture of Edo. As you know, we receive a lot of federal funding. So in the bottom right, you can see a majority of our funding comes from either federal or state government. Our largest funds are from WIOA Workforce Development Awards and from HUD's annual CDBG award, among others. And then you can see the other blocks are really just our general fund and special revenue fund budgets. I guess in essence of time, if we can go to the next slide. So again, each division talked about their reductions, and I'll get to expansions next, but really just wanted to break out where those reductions are coming from at the holistic level. You can see kind of the split between personnel and services. And then I also want to mention that you won't find technically in the general fund portion of our budget, but we are reducing our business incentive fund from about $1.2 million every year to $1 million next year as part of our savings. That's where some of the savings are coming from. Okay, next slide. And then on the next slide is just, again, the two change requests, the two expansions that the teams have talked to you about, both in services and supplies, totaling $550,000. So just wanted to show the holistic view of where those are coming from. And then I just have two more slides before I hand it back off to Eric to close this out. So this one, really a couple items I want to point out here. This is our year-over-year general fund budget, and we've broken it out by division, just so you can see how it's broken out by division in graphical form. Really two areas to point out. The one Irene had already talked to about on Nest and the great work that her and her team are doing, and kind of the expansions that we've seen and how her team has grown, essentially from nothing now to almost just over $1.4 million. And we'll get to personnel in a second. So great work on that end, and I think it's really important to note the expansions that we're seeing in our Nest team. And then the other one I want to mention is DSBO. I think Stephanie Adams had mentioned earlier this week how they had set up a new special revenue fund dedicated to those areas that are 100% funded by the airport. So taking them off the general fund and transferring them into the special revenue fund. What I want to mention on DSBO for 2021, that number does include those personnel expenses and services expenses that did move off under the special revenue fund. It'll look a little bit different in your budget book, but I didn't want to cause the confusion. So this is the holistic view of what DSBO looks like, including that special revenue fund transfer. Okay, and then finally, last slide, the same information except from an FTE standpoint. So again, you can see two areas I wanted to call out: the Nest area with the expansions that Irene was talking about. Again, this is just general fund, so it does not include a lot of her staff that is grant funded. So just on the general fund side, you can see the increases. And then finally, again, on DSBO, really it includes the transfers that you will note in the budget book onto that new special revenue fund that the finance office had set up. And with that, I think I'll kick it off to Eric to close this out. Thank you again.
Eric, are you there?
Okay, I'm here. My apologies. So I think you heard from the rest of our team, the leadership, that we're really focusing on 2021 and really having a equity-focused COVID-19 strategy for recovery. As we developed our economic development plan in 2018 with a 2.5% unemployment environment, it's not really a relevant strategy today as we're in this historic economic crisis. But there's opportunity. In 2008, we really came out of the recession better and faster than many of our peer cities, ranking in the top quintile in terms of job growth, rising income, attracting that millennial talent, and really transitioning Denver to be a booming startup hub. So, I think it has been noticed by national publications. Recently, Moody's Analytics reported that Denver is in the top 10 cities to recover from this current recession. I think we have a lot of strengths according to that study, and from what we've seen from the historic growth and bounce back from the 2008 recession, our educated workforce being able to bounce back, and our low population density relative to our peers. And obviously, as we're working with our peer agencies, our sister agencies, and you heard from Brendan Hanlon yesterday, Denver is the only city and county in the U.S. with a AAA rating from all three rating agencies. So I could keep going on about some of the strengths that we have, but obviously as we work with the ERRC, and as we heard from the mayor yesterday, pulling every tool that we had during the 2008 recession, and one of them was our ability to accelerate capital projects, including the $170 million in Elevate Denver bonds to the $478 million of capital program delivery, really creating opportunities for workers and small business in the broader economy. So on the next slide, really illustrates in terms of GDP, income, unemployment, and job growth, how we came out of that 2008 recession, and that's that opportunity we're talking about. Next slide. So although the U.S. and especially Denver had a strong recovery from the recession, that growth has not been distributed evenly. There is a persistent and widening disparity in income, upward mobility, and wealth outcomes. amongst communities of color. You can see that on this slide. On the next slide. So as we peaked in April in unemployment for the city and county at 13.4%, we moderated down to 8.8%. In terms of weekly initial unemployment claims, we peaked at 12,500 weekly claims. We've now moderated to about 1,000 per week. So as we're working towards stabilizing the economy, we're now looking at that long-term recovery. And really, we are trying to better understand the current state of the economy and the effects of COVID-19's economic impacts on various populations. So the key areas, current landscape, really trying to understand the struggling industry sectors and vulnerable populations, looking at the future job landscape to bring good jobs and stable jobs for Denver residents, industries that we want to look at in the future in terms of sector growth opportunities, what training, retraining, upskilling is needed for the most vulnerable populations. So we look forward to working with council to better understand your constituent needs. As I addressed on the previous slides, we have had a template of success for 2008, but we really need to have a focused effort to support small business, including entrepreneurs and micro businesses, and really diversify Denver's economy and workforce. And obviously the goal is to have this current plan and study to really give us a roadmap to achieve equity and recovery and beyond. So thank you again for this opportunity to present our budget request. In addition to the team, I would like to thank the Economic Relief and Recovery Council members in advising us through this crisis, and especially Council Chair Lori Davis. Really the budget that we presented today aligns with our goal to rebuild an equitable economy. So with that, I say thank you, and we have the team here to answer any questions you may have.
That's great. Thank you, Eric, and to the team. The first questions come from Councilwoman Ortega. Councilwoman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Eric, thank you and your team for great summary of information. I want to just jump into a couple of questions, and you don't necessarily need to answer them all now because we're going to write them down and make sure they get to you guys. The first one, obviously, had some exchanges back and forth about is the importance of staff that are bilingual in the workforce centers. I got some information back that the info I had was inaccurate, but wanted to confirm that those folks are actually community interfacing, that are bilingual on the staffs, especially at the workforce centers and in, that interface with any of the human service staffs to ensure that the very people who have been hit the hardest by COVID, who are looking for work and trying to get back on their feet, are getting the help they need in the languages that they need. So let me stop at that. Second, I want to jump to is just asking, and you don't need to cover this now, what is being done to overhaul the contracting process to make sure that we're making it more simplified and not so complex, especially when we're doing the small grants with community nonprofits and small businesses that don't have any experience interfacing with the city and understanding the complexities, and that don't have attorneys to help them look at the contracts and all of that stuff. Let me go on to the third. Workforce goals, making sure that we are no longer talking about a pilot project, but that we are incorporating workforce goals for local hire into our projects. I appreciate the work that Katrina and her team have been doing on the, MBE, WBE compliance, and I think they've done a phenomenal job in shoring up the office, providing training, doing the interface with the business community, helping them understand their roles and responsibilities to comply with the program. So the only question on that DSBO is, have we seen the systems shored up to ensure that we're getting the tracking data on B2G and LCP tracker. Let me move on to the next one. So just asking a question about the business development opportunities and the nexus with housing. I want to know who I can put a former NFL football player in touch with who wants to bring a housing manufacturing business to Denver that can push out 20 housing units a day by manufacturing on site. They've got, a technology that has been built in other places across the country and around the globe that are fireproof and earthquake proof, and would love to just put them in touch with the right people to be talking about that, particularly if this is a fit for Aerotropolis to have a manufacturing warehouse on the Aerotropolis property. And then the interface also with social enterprise startups to piggyback. Obviously, we're providing funding for startup businesses, but I don't think we've created that nexus with our shelter community, our housing providers, our community correction providers, to ensure that we're creating those workforce opportunities folded in with those entities that are trying to help individuals get back on their feet. And by providing some businesses, I go back to the Delancey Street model. A number of people visited a model in Florida. I believe it was in Miami that did something similar. So I think just continuing to close the gaps where we're no longer so siloed with, funding sources, that we're looking at how we bring the resources together in a more comprehensive way to have greater impact on the lives of the people we're trying to serve. And then I think you covered the last piece with a couple of the slides, but just trying to understand when we move people from DITO to host, in the budget book, it shows 17.25% of staffing that are funded by the general fund. And, the one slide showed how much money is funded with, the grant funds that we receive, but it doesn't tell us how many of the employees that equates to. So having some clarity on that would be helpful. So overall, your team's doing an amazing job for that, and look forward to getting the answers when you all can get them. And I'm going to pass these on to one of our staff members who will get the questions to you guys. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Sure. Eric, do you have any immediate response, or do you have all that down and get back later?
I did take my notes, but it's interesting. We have visited and have met with various manufacturers, and I agree with you. That would be a great target to have. So, but obviously, we would have to work in collaboration with a few of our agencies, and Aerotropolis would be the location.
All right. Thank you. Next up is Councilwoman Kniech.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the team. I am going to confess I had to step out a couple times. So if my questions were answered, just tell me that and I will gracefully dismiss. I saw the transfer out of the BIF of $200,000, the Business Investment Fund, but what I can't tell from the budget book is what the actual running balance is and how much we're leaving in that fund and what your intended uses might be, given that it's a different kind of era. I'm just questioning about how much we're leaving on the table in terms of business recruitment.
Yeah, I'll leave that question to Deborah or Matthew, or maybe even the finance team on the mechanics.
Okay, thanks.
I'm happy to jump in and provide a response right now. So currently, so you get a sense of how BIF operates. As mentioned, we typically get $1.2 million a year. This year, or 2021, it'll be $1 million. We do think it's critical that we have that tool in our toolbox. It's one of the very few tools that we have to work with in terms of business attraction and retention. We do, in all likelihood, I would say, do as many retention projects with those dollars as we do attracting additional companies up to Denver. So our current status is the total budget for BIF right now is a little over $10 million. With about $8 million of that is actually executed in contracts, which we're paying out for, and we're getting both jobs and capital investment and some other community benefits from as well. We do have a pipeline of about $2 million, and these are projects which we have been working with, and in some cases actually have extended offer letters to, which we're waiting to hear that they accept the offer and agree to move to Denver. So we have about 12 to 15 companies in that pipeline, and about half of those have been extended offer letters for BIFs.
Great. And if you could just maybe get me afterwards, I just couldn't seem to find the line item in the budget book. I see a business and work, I see an economic development SRF, but I don't see the BIF line item. So just to be able to track what you're saying in the book, that would be helpful.
And I will tell you, and Matthew can jump in as well, I think it was, there's actually a mistake in the budget book that's going to be corrected in the October edition. So right now, I think it indicates a little over 2.2 million, which is not correct. So that'll be revised in the next edition.
Great. And just shoot me the page number so I can follow along when it does change. That would be great. The other question I had, Eric, it sounded to me like when you were on your last slides that maybe you guys are doing a little bit of a study about is that right? Did I catch you're doing a study on some of those topics about what the future holds?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay. How much are we spending on that?
So we had $150,000 of non-general fund COVID relief funds in the second round.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So that covers the whole cost. It's not also general fund. That's the whole cost. Great. One question I have, if this is not in the scope, is, I keep hearing that the good news, bad news, Denver may attract more employees without actually attracting their employers, because some people will make a permanent shift to this work from home and remote working, and that, they'd rather eat a few travel costs a year than eating the cost of living on the coasts, right? So I keep hearing futurists and economists talking about that shift. I guess I just am curious if your study is going to look at that, because I think there's a certain question about what does business look like if it doesn't come with all of your employees in either direction. Maybe we get the employees, but not the business. Or maybe we get the business, but their employees are all over the country. And I guess that so much of our model is based on this very traditional concentration of employers with businesses, that I really want to see us challenge our thoughts about traditional incentives like the BIF we've been talking about, and whether they're going to make sense in the same way. I will just, and obviously things like manufacturing and construction, they're always going to be site-based, but the knowledge and information industries that you described as the growing industries, I just have some questions and just want to make sure that those kinds of questions are going to be discussed in the study.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and we have had those discussions. I think it's more good than bad, but you're correct. As larger employers on the West Coast and East Coast goes towards a hub and spoke model, Denver is a great location to be a spoke because of our lower costs. I see those employees and that in migration of those employees adding to our economy and being consumers as well. But, we could have that debate on the good and the bad, but it's definitely on the table. It has been part of the discussion.
Yeah, well, even if it's, I think this is, I'm really glad that we did the consolidation of housing and homelessness together. But the piece that I'm worried about, we're so stuck right now in the emergency mode with housing and homelessness that this trend worries me a lot in terms of pressure and increased housing demand. And it's why Irene's division is so important, that we're continuing to talk about displacement, because that wave of of spoke employees where we have, already a housing crisis and cost affordability issue. So I think that housing connect piece in terms of how it works is really important to us if we're thinking long-term recovery. So I know you have that thought, even though housing isn't in your division anymore, but I want the study to look at it too. Because that's the negative, right? That's the downside to attracting those employees at rates that we don't have housing to keep up with, and they think our prices are low. Meanwhile, our longtime residents are being priced out. So, thank you.
Good point.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman. Next up is Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to go back to grants really quickly to kind of clarify. And before I do, thank you to your entire team. I just have to say it again. You guys have been working tirelessly to support our community 7 days a week, just really long hours during, COVID recovery. And I just have to say again, how grateful I am for your support. And to Irene, thanks for bearing the lead on that one, Irene. I didn't hear that the East Colfax bids had gotten their those grants and had received those. So thank you so much for all of your help with that. I am hugely excited to hear that. So that is fantastic news. Really quick clarification on the grant stuff. So as I'm looking through the budget book, what I'm kind of seeing is that a lot of that stuff is disappearing, and I'm unclear whether it's disappearing because it is being redistributed to different areas, like different locations, like maybe it's going to HUD and it's being put under them, or is it disappearing altogether? For example, some of the TANF's training things that are, down 2/3, and I'm on page 309 of the budget book, just FYI. There's a disability employment initiative grant that is gone 100%. So I'm trying to figure out and wrap my mind around what of these things are disappearing altogether and what just look like they're going away because maybe they're being rehoused under a different division or something like that.
Yeah, I'll call on Matthew Carnes to describe, I would say, more the migration of where it lies in the books.
Sure, thank you. And actually, I may have Deborah jump in on some of those specific items because we actually had that question a couple weeks ago, and she can answer the programmatic side. But the way the grants work out is, when we partner with finance to put these grant amounts in, it's really not based on budget, but based on how much you expect to expend that year. And so things like TANF, for example, was a much larger program throughout the past years, and it's starting to wind down potentially. I think Deborah can talk about potential expansion on TANF, but that is a good example where it is winding down. And so we have some carryover money coming into next year, but not as much as we've had in the past because the program is winding down. So it's kind of a combination of the ones that you do see being reduced typically are actually being reduced and they're winding down to the end of their program life. But other ones are just movements on how much, like CDBG, for example, we're not getting near as much program income this year as we typically do just because of COVID and the loan deferments and some of the other items. And so we might get, $6 to $7 million a year, but we also typically, like last year was a very big year, we might get $4 million, $5 million, even $6 million in program income. We're probably only going to get $2 to $3 million in program income this year. So that number would go down just because of the amount of money that we expect to have to spend next year. But I'll let Deborah jump in on some of those that you mentioned specifically.
Yeah, on the TANF item, we did have a much closer working relationship with DHS in previous years. And actually right now where they're at is where we were at a few months ago. They're in the process of making their contractual decisions about who their providers are going to be in the coming months. So that may change. Our relationship with them may change once they make those decisions about who they're going to contract with. And as Matthew indicated, some grants just have a certain life cycle. They're for a 3-year period, like our Tech P grant was I think for 5 years, and that totally rolled off last year. I am very pleased to let you know that we will be, we're in the process of receiving a new grant called Pathway Home. It'll be close to $1 million, and it'll be focused on re-entry, folks re-entering the job market who have been incarcerated. It'll be focused on providing pre and post-release services. So, we get a few of these usually every year, which will be, 1 to a 3-year grant, and then we'll execute, and then the next opportunity comes along. So it's pretty cyclical.
Okay, great. So are there, thank you for that explanation. I think that clarifies a lot for me. So there are some things that are just rolling off, like, for example, I'm looking at this disability employment initiative. Is that one of those like grants that is just, it's hitting the end of its 3-year cycle and it's disappearing altogether then?
It is. However, some of the work that we've been doing around that will continue to be performed. We've just integrated it into our normal work processes.
That was my next question, was then what happens when like the grant ends? Do we continue that work but in a different way, or what does that look like?
It continues, and that specifically, a lot of that grant was focused on helping us assess our facilities and our services, so how they could really focus on supporting disabled people. So we went through the assessment process. We made the adaptations to our facilities so that they can continue to be in place to serve disabled populations in the best way possible.
Councilwoman, just to interject here. Stephanie Adams had her hand up, and I don't know if she wanted to add to this answer or not. Stephanie, did you want to chime in on this? Okay, I guess not. Her hand is now down. So
otherwise, I'm good. That was my last question.
Excellent, thank you. Next is Councilman Hines. Councilman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Dito, and actually I want to thank the Budget Office. I think Stephanie's actually dropped off, but I want to thank the Budget Office about the context about the SRF. I was a little confused at first because it's somewhat of a new budget technique, but I see that it makes sense that we're separating transfers in and out of enterprise funds. I haven't read all the entire budget proposal in detail. I do see that on page 87 there are some transfers to SRFs. Is there going to be a roll-up of all of the, like, say, all the airport funds from all of the agencies that go into that enterprise and back, vice versa?
I could cover this because Stephanie's microphone does not work. So we have a summary, Councilman, in the position or FTE table in the front of the book. There's actually a statement at the bottom of the section that says, please be aware that the following positions have been allocated to this particular fund and that mechanics. And then what we try to do is in each agency section that was implicated in this move, there is a bullet or a line item call out that says, the following number of positions and the following dollars have been allocated to this special revenue fund. And then we also have a new description of that special revenue fund in the special revenue fund section. And we'll give you the page numbers that you could reference for each of those.
Great, and really, I think it's the last one that I was that I haven't found yet. And I'm interested in the total dollars from all the agencies, including Dito and safety and others that go to the airport or vice versa. So thank you for that. The only other question that I have, my colleagues were great and asked a bunch of the questions that I already had, is about the 16th Street Mall. We, a little less than 2 months ago, voted on a few interagency agreements, including with Dura, and that created a lot of media attention and constituent attention. I noticed the extra 300K. Is there any relationship between the two, or are we allocating an extra 300,000 for the mall because the interagency agreements just aren't here yet? I was interested that you dedicated extra slides specifically to this 300K. So because we had the immediate attention a couple months ago, I'm assuming we're about to have it again.
Yeah, so I believe, and Brendan could jump in, but really the $300,000, and it's highlighted here because it is one of our few expansion requests as far as expansions versus reductions. But this is really to support small businesses directly and stabilize them, much like we're doing with business relief grants right now. And part of that is technical assistance, really a business marketing campaign, really to help the construction impacts on these businesses.
So it's not related to the construction at all, but there happens to be construction that's impacting small businesses and we should help them out.
Exactly. We deployed a similar tactic with Brighton Boulevard quite a few years back.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is that all? Great. Okay, next is Councilwoman Torres. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Deborah, I just want to call out, I think, the great work in doing some of the digital equity stuff, and I look forward to seeing how that starts to impact households. Irene, just a couple comments and questions for the Nest area. I do appreciate the role that you've built your Nest into the excise and license application process. I think that's an incredibly valuable space to be in a procedural way, that it is a layer or a filter that has to be addressed. And I know that that's come into play for one of the District 3 neighborhoods recently, and I appreciate you for stepping in to make sure we had the time to get a GNA achieved. I do wonder, when you're doing those reviews, what do you look for? What are some of the equity benchmarks that you have that can come out in terms of, here are the outcomes that we achieve for neighborhoods?
Are you speaking specifically about GNAs or in general?
In general, when you're looking at the excise application.
Okay. So primarily, they send all of the applications, and what I do is when they are in one of the vulnerable neighborhoods, if it is a new application, sometimes they're just changing ownership, and so the business already exists. But if it's a new application, we reach out to the people who we have connections with in that neighborhood to let them know that there's a proposal and to share with them how they can get involved and offer our assistance. So we basically look at the location. As you know, these marijuana, at least in particular, are in the inverted L as well. And so we're keeping our eyes on that.
And then translation and interpretation, budget, and personnel. What you have in terms of Nest dollars that are committed to this, and then how many of your team, your 5 new folks, are bilingual?
Mm-hmm. We have 3 members of our team who are fluent in Spanish, and then we share our translation budget with DIDO in general. We had inherited quite a bit, actually, part of the NDCC effort. And so, for example, right now, Host is in between translators, and so we're helping support some of their efforts at getting equity in applications and things until they can get their translator up. So we work with a team, HRCP, to be sure that we're coordinating what we translate, who has the better rate and things.
Okay, thank you.
And Councilwoman, I'd like to add to that, because Councilwoman Ortega had a similar question on language support, that just in our workforce services department and their partnership with Eckerd, we have about 10 bilingual members on that team on the workforce side, covering 5 covering Spanish, 2 Amharic, 1 Korean, 1 French, and 1 American Sign Language. And we also have a contract with a provider when we need it that taps into 160 different languages. So we do have resources across the whole unit.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Next is Councilwoman Gilmore. You're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this question will be for Irene. I wanted to understand a little bit more. Thank you for talking about the Peer Navigator support program, and specifically within that program. What are your tools around engaging folks more on a virtual platform? Or if you could talk a little bit about how that community outreach and engagement is going to work, especially during this time.
Thank you, Councilman Gilmore, for the question. We're working with a number of organizations that we do sometimes have, for example, three-way phone calls, including an interpreter on the phone call. If the person has access to computers, we use that. And for the outreach for support, a number of our partners actually are still going door to door, wearing masks and using good hand sanitation. And in fact, for our priority neighborhood business support, we had about 12 people from DIDO go out and reach out to our businesses in our small neighborhoods ourselves, just to show people that we're here and interested in caring and break down any fears they might have about the support we had.
Great, thank you. And I'm sure you have the data, and I don't know if I just haven't maybe seen it, or if it's in a different place. But do you have kind of summary reports of what the peer navigators are, hearing within the community? What are the biggest concerns? I mean, I would just from Montbello and Green Valley Ranch, really food access, job security, childcare, since folks are maybe not able to send their children to school. But is there a roll up of kind of those top concerns by folks? And then second question is around workforce development and how we're supporting small nonprofits, local nonprofits in getting folks connected to the workforce development training centers or different resources. Especially, I'm thinking about folks that maybe were working out at Den in industries that we're not seeing them come back yet, and I'm not sure if they will. And so workforce development is a major issue that we're trying to keep at the forefront.
So I can turf workforce to Deborah, but I could tell you that there is a lot of misinformation out there around programs that are available and who qualifies or not. I actually spoke with a Mile High Health Alliance, and the Conectoras in Montbello did not realize that people who were not documented were eligible for TRUA. And so there's just some basic information that people don't even realize we have resources available for them. I think because of our role, we tend to hear disproportionately about needs for housing and needs for our small businesses that are not as digitally connected to get support in figuring out how they work in the new post-COVID or during COVID environment.
And I'll jump in, and maybe Tony wants to jump in as well. But we do have a workforce center at Den, and we have staff based there that are specifically focused on working with the concessionaires and the employers as well as the employees at Den. So I know they've been providing some specific services for the workforce there. Tony, if you want to jump in and talk about that.
I appreciate that and appreciate the question, Councilwoman Gilmore. It's a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. As Deborah mentioned, we do have a workforce center out to the airport, and really for the first year, we were supported through FTEs by Den. And so we've been able to really connect with the Concessionaires Association and bring very specific training and resources and employment connections to that community. And, essentially, we've seen, Deborah mentioned the numbers, is kind of this 22,000 to 44,000 in 1 year, and we're trending to even go beyond that, just of new customers. What that means for us is this essentially, it's tens of thousands of new customers to our system, right? So anybody that files a claim for unemployment insurance in the state of Colorado is required to register with the public workforce system. And so what that allows us to do is really send out targeted messaging to individuals based on the industry that they may have been displaced, based on their educational background, based on a number of different things. And we really see it as our job right now to inform these folks, to let individuals know of different opportunities, different career pathways. And that's what we're trying to do with our virtual services and through our call center operation right now. And we're anxious to get back to more of a full-term, full-time, Monday through Friday physical presence at the workforce centers, but have been extremely proud of what this team has been able to do virtually through these services, through the call center, and through some of these curbside enrollments and some of the innovative programs that we've introduced.
Great, thank you. My just a follow-up would be to get that list of concerns and priorities that the peer navigators have collected so that we can share that with all of council, and appreciate Irene, Deborah, and Tony, you all chiming in. I guess the last question is, with the workforce development training centers currently being closed and not having that one-to-one opportunity to meet with folks, has there been any conversation around having appointments, or how can we accommodate that a bit more? Because sometimes it's difficult for people to maybe have access to technology, or they just really need to sit down with someone. And with reduced budgets, but seeing that there are some increases within the DITO budget, will any of that help to supplement some of that work as well?
Yeah, I'll try not to get into the weeds too much from an operational standpoint, but the way we're operating now is, again, the workforce centers, and we have 3 centers, so one at the Richard T. Pascoe Center, and one at the R.E.P. Taylor Center, and then, of course, one at the airport, and those are open 1 day a week. And then the other 4 days, essentially we're operating a call center for folks, and those folks are directed based on the need. And then to respond to that kind of the bilingual question as well, that call center is really a team of 7, of which 4 are bilingual, 1 Spanish, 2 Amharic, and 1 Korean. But then again, as folks are calling in, the majority of the questions and inquiries that we're getting, as you would imagine, have been around unemployment insurance, and really kind of checking a box within the system that allows them to receive payment. So we've been able to handle the majority of those calls through the call center, but we're starting to see more and more folks now trying to access and get back to work, right? And so that's where our partner with Eckerd Connects and our other youth partners come into play, and we've been able to make more referrals back into the more intensive services and the job search and the career counseling. So we're seeing a bit of a change, which is good, from kind of strictly 99% unemployment to a more of a mix of, all right, ready to get back to work. What do you have?
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, folks are eager to get back in our city buildings or have some semblance of being able to come and even on a reservation sort of basis, that they can actually get in and talk to someone, especially now more than ever. So thank you, Eric, and your team, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. Actually, I can boil it down maybe to just one here. And the current, in committee, we got 2 resolution requests this week for next week on consent to add some funding to the small business relief and recovery grants and to the nonprofit relief and recovery grants. I think it totaled about $6.5 million between the 2 of them. And those are, please correct me if I'm wrong, those are reimbursable under the CARES Act. Is that the case?
Those are actually COVID relief funds that were presented for COVID relief round 2.
Right, and so they're reimbursable, correct? Or we already have the funding?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, what are we going to do if some of the more far out projections are on the mark, and this the need to be in small groups to open up more slowly continues into 2021? Will we have resources? I don't know that Congress is going to provide anything else, but will we be able to support the small business and nonprofit community going forward within the confines of this budget, or will we have to look elsewhere?
So, couple questions. So, in terms of the COVID relief funds, we have a December 31st deadline to expend those dollars.
Right.
So we shall see what happens with federal legislation to release more dollars to us in 2021. In terms of COVID-related other funds, such as COVID CDBG funds, there's a potential there. We are analyzing some of the recent rules that came out on how those funds can be deployed, but that could be a potential resource. And I'll say, even with the COVID relief funds, this second round that we are distributing, we're reanalyzing some of the criteria. So, perhaps you qualified before for just one grant of 7,500. Well, if they're still not in a great place and needs additional assistance, we're looking at changing some of the criteria so they can be funded a second time.
Okay, will you keep us posted on that?
Yes.
On those changes, please? Okay, thank you. The other questions I have are more specific to those two resolutions. I'll do that through committee. I don't have anyone else in the queue. Does any member have a question, or are we going to wrap up 17 minutes early? It looks like we're good. All right. I want to thank staff. Oh, thank you. I want to thank staff, by the way, at Central Staff for arranging this and being very communicative, because what we're going to do for Channel 8, we're not going to begin the next budget session until 3:10, but we're going to stay in this Zoom environment. So what we need you to do is just shut off your cameras and shut off your microphones, and then come back at 3:10 or just before 3:10, and Channel 8 will spool up, and then we'll do the Department of Public Health and Environment. And so we'll have 25 minutes here to go and get our snacks, because since we're meeting virtually, Sky Stewart doesn't have, she apparently didn't arrange for snacks to be delivered to our houses. And so we're going to have to go get something on our own, right? With that, if there's no other comments or questions, we will adjourn this meeting, stay in this meeting room, and we will be back at 3:10 with Councilman Kashmann chairing. So this part of the meeting is recessed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Will you come down? I have to do some work, but I'll come down, yes. No, you gotta go downstairs. Mommy's, Daddy's working up here for a little bit, okay? No, I want you. I'm coming down. I can't come down right now. You gotta go. I gotta stay up here. I don't want to. Sorry, you need to go downstairs. I have to stay up here. I'm sorry. Where are you? I'm gonna go sit down here. Hello, sir. How's it going?
There he is. Can you hear me?
I can, yes. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Awesome. How's your day going?
So far, so good. Just not on the time that I wish I was on, but I'm only a couple of minutes late, so that's not too
That was not too bad. How was your lunch?
good.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to go through, so model is kind of a beginning, right, of a model, and there's a lot of assumptions in it. And so mostly what I wanted to do was spend a moment talking through those assumptions, and then if we can make sure all those assumptions are relatively at least conservative, then I can finish building out all the financials and kind of see where we are. But I subscribe to the idea that that all models are wrong, but some are useful, right? And so the goal of this model is not to be accurate, 100% accurate. The goal is to be useful in making sure that the financial assumptions and the financial performance and all the sort of the drivers of performance are there, and that at least the initial plan is solid from a financial standpoint. Okay.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions we're going with here, so nobody ever done anything like this before either. So we've tried to put as much factual information into as we can. So we're just going to run off of that. When things do come up that we can adjust with, we'll do that.
Mm-hmm. All right, hold on. Security and privacy. Yep, go ahead.
I think we need to make sure that we have some premises in place that help guide this. And one is, we want to run for billing the whole time. I mean, even if we're going to get to a commercial phase, we need to understand what we can outsource and do that.
Yep.
Perfect. And make sure that we continue to be in that mode where we're looking for opportunities to be as lean as possible, making sure that we accommodate those costs, on a short-term basis versus acquiring resources and things that long-term we may not need. So those are kind of the premise that we follow. But the other part of that is around us. Our basic model is we're an innovative company, and when you're in the innovation side, a lot of times you carry more overhead than you would otherwise, because you want to try to keep as much of that stuff in-house and close to your best as possible. So that's what we will understand and make sure that we accommodate.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I think that the philosophy is that I think about is, focus on having humans for the things that only humans can do, right? Which is, there's a lot of, so you and I have both been in companies where there's a lot of overhead that just builds up over time because of bad processes or inefficient processes or processes that shouldn't be happening in the first place. And there's things that only humans can do, right? And so I'm not opposed to the idea of letting people build their teams or having having overhead costs to do that. It's before we hire a person, we should be asking ourselves, is this process value added? Is there some way we can change the process from the way it's always been done, so that we're not doing things the way they've been done and not adding people just to push the button on a bad process? And then give me a chance to automate it or to propose a different way to do it in using and use the technology available to us. And then after all of those things are met, if it's still something we need a human to do, then yeah, let's get a human to do it.
I agree. That is thought process and the level we follow to be able to determine resource strengths that we want to apply. So
okay,
I agree.
Well, let's start going through here. Yeah. So this is all this is, the goal of all of this is to come up with an income statement and a balance sheet and a statement of shareholder equity, right? And look at that and come up with a valuation, at least in the beginning. So let's start with something that's probably pretty easy. The equipment assumptions, right? And the reason these are, obviously important is they drive both the depreciation assumptions, which right now depreciation is pretty simple, but offers a tax shield, and more importantly, it drives the capital budget and the capital repair budget. So, build value, salvage value, obviously the most conservative assumption for anything is salvage value of 0. But I figured at least the frame and the lubricator salvage value is something non-zero, since you can sell the scrap metal. More importantly, so I wanted to look and see that, is this the initial sort of asset build value? And I tried to add up to your build cost per unit that you told me. And then I wanted to validate these sort of repair and replacement costs, because those are very material, because they're per event and they drive a lot of OpEx. So does it make sense that for the lubricator it would cost, essentially $80,000 every time we wanted to replace the lubricator? Or do these 4 numbers roughly make sense, or are they too high?
Yeah, I think for what we're looking at on the basic, Gen 1 and Gen 2, that's probably very good. I think once we move to the later generations,
DMMS is ready to go in 1 minute if you are.
may go up a little more because we may put a little more bells and whistles on it.
Yeah.
All about trying to get data and have it. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, 1 second, I gotta mute something over here. Sorry.
You ready? Just you up here.
Oh, sorry about that. My wife is live streaming the Denver City Council budget hearings, so it's good fun. Yeah. Oh, man.
It's always a good time. Dealing with those guys, that's an interesting day to day.
Oh yeah. All right. So sorry, you were saying, so Gen 1 is okay. Depreciation.
Yeah, I think Gen 1 and Gen 2. I think in the second year we'll probably try to, and we'll start that halfway through the first year of commercialization. So what can we do to provide better value, and what data can we ascertain with this tool that we can then turn into commercialized data for our clients. And so that will then go into that Gen 3 and beyond in the year 2, that will focus on expanding our sensors and communication devices to enhance that service.
All right. So nothing wrong with these assumptions. And like I said, this is all just assumptions.
I think for year 1, Gen 1 and 2, I think those are spot on. Right now I don't have anything that could change that.
Okay. All right. So we talked about some operating assumptions. We talked about it. So one caution point in the activity. So last time we talked through the activity drivers and kind of the sort of the active unit fleet size, and said, hey, and what you're looking at here is kind of this one. So just so you can draw your eye to it. So that's kind of the active units at the end of the year. So getting to 200, and I don't want to put in sensitivities on the end. So all the assumptions right now are kind of based on getting to this number of active units. And we'll come back to that because it is material, because it obviously drives a lot of cost, but I want to make sure some of the periodicities I've assumed are correct, right?
I mean, you hit on both of them. That drives a lot of cost, and it also drives, our revenue numbers. So those two are really the key drivers that we base all of our assumptions on.
Yeah, and so so let's say some assumptions I've made. Let's talk about the number of certifications and recertification testing, right? So the one assumption I made is that everything that is built is going to have to be certified at the beginning, so that's pretty easy, right? And then the other assumption I made is that we kind of do a cycle where we take the previous year's total active fleet and break it down over 12 months. So we're essentially recertifying the entire previous year's fleet every year, right? And so that's just essentially taking, so for the year 2022, we'll have 61 units active at the end of 21. We'll take basically 5 units a month on average and recertify them throughout the year, and then repeat the process. So essentially it gets us into a cadence where at least every unit is being recertified once a year or so, which I think, like I said, the simple.
On this, we're talking recertification versus rebuild, correct?
Yes, recertification. And the cost I assume for recertification right now is just like $10,000, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good number. I mean, right now, when you look at, that's been 4 or 5 years since I dealt with frac spreads. But to recertify, a frac spread, you were looking between 15 and 20,000 about 4 years ago. I won the Southern Fall about 30,000 now, which is a much, number of pieces is much larger. The thing about well control equipment is, as long as it's not a BOP, there's really not a lot there to recertify, and that, it's a simple pressure test and a wall thickness test, and then just a visual. Okay. So there's a lot fewer pieces, and so yeah, I think 10,000 should cover.
Okay. So next assumption is around, so how often lubricators and hydraulic systems and hoses are replaced, right? And so there's, obviously, as you said, we're going to get data that's going to improve this, but I have to put in something at the beginning, right? And so the something I assume is that in any, and like I said, this is an assumption and it's a decimal because I know you can't replace 0.25 of a lubricator, right? But it's really a cost proxy. So the assumption, and it doesn't make a lot of sense in the first year, but let's go to the second year. Assumption is that in any given month, 5% of the fleet will require lubricator replacement. So I actually think now that I come back to that, I think that's actually kind of high.
That is kind of high, and one way to look at it, you may look at it differently, but let's look at it as percent of lifespan. Okay. And tie that in there. So every month you're losing so much of your lifespan. Okay. And that way you're not looking at the total fleet, you're looking at the total lifespan of the fleet. So if you go back to your hours, and which we'll actually need to just look at it for dates, but let's say I've got 10 units right out there and I'm consuming on a monthly basis, if I'm doing an annual, the stuff we're doing will probably last 2 years before we have to rebuild it. Okay. And so every month I'd be consuming 1/24 of that lifespan. Okay. So that's a good thing. So depreciation timeline, I had the frames depreciation timeline at 5 years, but do you think these should be, everything sort of 3 years and 2 years depreciation timeline? The frame is right. You got, frame and rigging supports. That is, you actually got it. The pipe and flanges. That's, I'd say that was 3 year. So where's the lubricator components at?
Sorry. Yeah, that was pipe and flanges. So that's lubricator. So number 2 here is lubricator.
Yeah. So that's 3 years as well. Yeah. No, you're going. But you're right. 2 years on hoses. Up there, control box. I think that's solid. Sensors. You think that they can last 2 years? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it depends on how good the sensors are. I think at the beginning we can.
And how well you bond from too makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think we'll learn a lot about that early on. In fact, I even say, the most conservative assumption is to put the shortest possible depreciation timeline that you see is reasonable. Yeah. So always for this, we're going to err on this. I would say err on the side of conservatism, which err on the side of shorter rather than longer.
I agree.
Okay. Well, like I said, we'll learn more about this a lot early on, but like I said, that's a good starting assumption. And from a depreciation standpoint, I'm doing the dirt simple method of depreciation, but there's a lot more thought we could put into this. But that's just kind of financial engineering.
You're doing actual depreciation versus financial depreciation.
Yeah, literally just straight line. Well, straight line, I guess would be the front term for it. RJ, what's up with that? we've got a guest here. You want to say hi?
You're absolutely out. Okay. I think you're spot on that.
Okay. So RJ, say hi to the cowboy.
Hi.
This is Mr. Billy.
Hi, Mr. Billy.
Yeah.
You have a big Dell computer.
I do have a big Dell computer. All right. What do you, RJ? I'm talking to Mr. Billy. What do you need?
Okay. Do you use your iPad? I put away my laundry.
Okay. Talk to mommy's in charge now, so talk to mommy. I don't have a problem with it though. Okay. Thank you. All right. Joys of being home. All right. Buddy, go downstairs. Talk to mom.
Mom said you
good kids is what it's all about. So good job.
All right. I don't know. You gotta go ask mommy to find it. All right. Okay. So let's go back into the activity assumption. So that changes a little bit. So you're saying from the standpoint of percent of useful life, and like I said, I'll try and do some calculations. But so you're saying for a lubricator replacement, how many lubricator replacements should there be in the useful life?
Okay, useful life, I'm going to say one. You would replace your lubricator once in that useful life. So we have 3 years over there. I think that's good for when you got on the depreciation numbers are fairly, I think, close.
Okay.
So what we would see in on those actual components in real life.
Okay, so I'd say I'll rejigger this one. Like I said, I was having to make an assumption, but and useful. So I'll figure out some way to recalculate the amount of events based on the number we expect in the useful life, and then it would be like essentially 3, 3. Okay. All right, I'll come back to that.
Because I mean, if you go strictly off of the fleet at a standard rate, I think that we're going to be high.
Oh yeah, and that was, like I said, this was always a proxy.
Over than under, but at the same time.
No, I don't want to overstate it because, well, you'll see why at the end. But yeah, so I think so the percent of active fleet was literally a proxy number just because the math was easier. But actually, I wanted to do it another way and then make the numbers work. So we'll come back to that in a minute. But so I'll come back and I'll recalculate the number of lubricator replacements, hydraulic systems, electronic and controls, and sensor package repairs. Assumptions right now are that lubricator and hydraulics are capital repairs, and electronics and sensors are expenses. Mobilizations moves completed. Right. This is one that it depends on if we're paying for it or if somebody else is paying for it. Because I don't know if I put this in as a calculation factor because I wasn't really sure whether we'd be paying for it or whether the client would be paying for it. So right now it's not actually driving the calculations, I don't think.
Okay, good. Because I think it really is based upon the contract time. Get the contract. These long-term leases, I see them being the ones moving it unless they pay us to do it.
Okay.
That would be good. Looking at the contract as their responsibility, and then the weekly per pad or per well or monthly would probably be us moving those. So.
Okay. All right. And yeah, we can come back to that. Also, I'll assume right now that we're not going to calculate in the cost of movements for the moment. Okay, so what I calculated based on that was the capital expenditure based on the build plan, the sort of the key expense activities, the capital repairs, and then all right. So let's go into overhead costs. Actually, let's do staffing plan first. So this was just based on, and so one, when you say the person to go out to the field and troubleshoot and come up with ideas to improve the cost, that's what I mean by cost engineering, right? So we're saying the same thing with different words, but it's the operational facing person that can troubleshoot, go out, come back, say let's change the design or let's figure out a different way to do this. So same concept there. I think, and we talked a little bit about the sort of the hiring philosophy. I think so. In the beginning, the predisposition will always be from a technology standpoint is, build the processes in such a way that they don't require people. automate them where absolutely, where they're necessary, so that I don't want us to have to hire people to scale up. Right, that's the thing. Right, as we scale activity, as we have a larger fleet, that should not require us to hire more people to push the button on processes. And so that's kind of the goal of the entire information technology design, is that these executives are going to be what I would call very self-enabled, because it's going to be before you hire somebody to do it, let's talk about how I can automate it. Do we really need to do it? Let's change the process. Let's use the tools at our disposal to figure it out. And then anything else, is really sort of can be managed through contractors or pure outsourcing.
Exactly. Well, and with a high asset intensity business model, we should be able to get either our vendors or suppliers to actually accommodate our systems with data. So in other words, the input requirements should be there.
No, I mean,
they should be able to do that for us, and our systems are updated. No, supply of materials.
No, that's right. And so all we have to do is build the interface to their system, right? And so the things that'll be really important for us early on is having a place to store the data, making sure we're creating the way it's stored is in a way that it's usable and sustainable, and so that we don't have to move things around later, and that we can access it. The interfaces and APIs, which that's just building the connections to customers and vendors, and making sure that we're not pushing pieces of paper back and forth. And like I said, I staggered this with the things that I think we're going to need first. So I think at the beginning, as you said, engineering and supply chain, getting those functional is going to be sort of the first things that need to happen, right? In addition to the finance and sort of the IT structure. Then as the fleet size grows, operations, and then as you have to sell and kind of begin pushing outward, there's the business development aspects of it. And then, like I said, this is just an assumption of what it might look like over 2021. It could take less time than this. It could take more time than this. Right? So does this match the timeline, at least the best timeline you had in your head at this moment? And if not, just say so. It's really easy for me to change.
It did. I'm looking to I haven't looked through every component. So the answer to that is yes, because I actually probably on the BD side will probably move him in until he'll probably come on within a month or two, if not about the same time as our operations.
Okay.
And I think you hit the operations person about right.
Okay.
To the second quarter next year. So somewhere around that same time frame, I feel like we'll probably be bringing on our BD lead.
Okay. And then because, go ahead.
I really want to start getting some drive into our bill schedule. I'd like to get here's one. I think I've talked about this. I do see a little bit of growth in the oil and gas industry. I see some, green shoots coming up that I feel will be, sustainable, more sustainable than it is right now. About the second half of next year, I would like to have a lot of those folks there's some folks that are looking long term, and they'll see that as when they're going to, when I look at the budgets, I guess what I'm saying, from this year into 2021, everybody's backloading their budgets.
Yep.
And with good reason. I mean, it's kind of what they're seeing. So I want to be able to tap into those backloaded budgets, and we're going to need to, from a pure marketing, but more importantly, direct sales and account management aspect, that needs to happen starting second quarter next year.
Well, and my only question about that is, and I'm going to obviously do sensitivities on this. I'm going to make sure we build a sensitivity profile of what the financials would look like if, the frac spreads stay at 80, and what the financials look like if the frac spreads go where you think it's going to go, which is essentially about double, or is some of those in the United States anyway. And so I think we'll build sensitivity around it, because I think we should probably build a plan that has good financial outcomes, both if the current fleet size doesn't go up and if it does.
Right.
We'll see.
Well, and then, like you say, timing around those events.
Yep. And obviously, if, like I said, if we're in first quarter next year and the number of frac spreads is still staying at 80, then it changes the build plan. It changes or potentially changes the schedule and the sequencing of all this. So what that does is essentially I put in. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I mean, we really have not talked specifically with the big boys. I mean, I talked to select individuals within those companies, the Chevrons, the Exxons, the Shells of the world. So they're aware of what we're doing. They don't have any understanding of where we're at in that process or where we could be. Once we get stood up and running, what I don't want to do is outgrow our ability to fund that growth.
Oh, yeah.
And my main goal in doing that is the potential of taking those bigger guys on like that with those caveats. And, I've talked about that, those caveats of having them fund that growth. Where they're actually the ones bringing the, we have funding coming from them, and, guiding what that bill schedule and that growth is.
Yep.
And so we may get to a point where we want to start having those conversations, and that's where the BD part will come into play.
Yeah, and that's something I'm still looking in my big finance books, figuring out how to model that event. So let's say, somebody gives us $5 million and says, I want you to use these to build up your fleet to then serve me. I'm gonna figure out how to model that in our income and balance sheet, because it's a unique situation from a financial standpoint, but that's a little bit deeper into the bowels of my financial books. So at the beginning, but yeah, I'll keep that in mind and trying to figure out a way to offset it. So right now I've modeled that, yeah, we want to, this is modeled as simply as, the most simple possible, let's try and get it so that we can fund our own cash flow.
Perfect.
So what I do with the salary assumptions here, and this is based on our discussion, is I add essentially a 30% factor to say this for seat costs, benefits, and essentially our benefit, whatever benefit package. Usually it's around 30% is a decent assumption, and then I translate that into a sort of a quarterly value and come up with our kind of essentially our fully burdened labor rates by quarter. Which, like I said, as we can slow this down or speed this up very easily, just by changing the schedule here. So I made it so that we can come in and adjust this, and then also made the assumption right now. So you mentioned that there would be a sort of a pre-revenue, post-revenue salary base assumption. Right now, I put that transition in quarter 2 of 2021. Though obviously, I'm sure everybody wants it to be earlier, but right now that's where I put it.
I think that's a good target date. I mean, I really that will be my goal. It really will. Here's where we'll be at. Once we have 10 units in the pipeline, not that we have 10 units going in the field, but we have gotten 10 units that will be in the process of either being fielded or being built. That will be when we move to a commercial model.
Okay.
Fully into a commercial model. The first 3 units will be our start of a commercial model, and there will be revenue associated with those. But until we get the other 7 done, we're still really in pre-commercial, pseudo-commercial, whatever you want to call that phase.
Yep.
Until we get commitment on the next 7, we won't be able to move forward.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm not worried about that. I think that's going to be a quick deal, but that's kind of the milestone that changes.
Well, I think our ability to do that, I mean, 10 units is a nice round number, but I think we'll probably be able to get more detailed with that calculation based on some of these other things, because it could change, faster, it could change slower, we could change the ramp up rate. So there's the goal would be to validate when is the right time to make that transition.
Agreed. And what I want to be completed before is when we are actually fully cash flow positive. And my calculations, and we'll see what you come up with this, but when we will become where our revenue and therefore our profit outstrips our CapEx and OpEx, it'll be somewhere around 20 units deployed.
Interesting.
It's kind of where I'm calculating that. So, and that's based on, that's based upon actual numbers, which then we can tie that back to the timeline. But that's what I've modeled is just somewhere around that number.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm trying to, we'll call this a triangulation, right? I intentionally did it in a different way to see if I can come up with the same results doing different numbers. So let's go to the pricing and commercial assumptions, right? So the purpose of all of this had to come up with a way to take the sort of operational days on hire and translate that into a revenue projection. That's it, right? And so all of this is kind of my way of attempting to break down and come up with a sort of a weighted average day rate realized that then we can multiply by the days on hire to get a revenue projection. That's kind of the purpose of this whole thing. Now, I'll talk you through how I did it. You could do this in several different ways, right? So the way I did it is one way. There are many different ways you could do this. So the way I got to this is I said, well, there's going to be different types of customers. Each of those types of customers is probably going to have different sort of a base rate and probably different payment terms and maybe a discount for the people who are investing in assets. And then each of those customers is going to make up a percentage of the total customer base. And so I was like, all right, if I can translate for every type of customer, if I can come up with an effective day rate and then multiply, make an assumption about how much of those types of customers there will be, then that will allow us to come up with a weighted effective day rate. And like I said, this is I'm sure, like I said, we could do this in many different ways, but stick with me for a minute, and then at the end we can decide to do it a completely different way. So then I said, okay, at the beginning, I need to come up with our kind of core beginning. So the 5 groups of customers: bare bones asset leased, power by the hour, right, which is somebody who essentially pays for uptime; the data and engineering collaborator, which is somebody who's working with us on using data and collaborating with us to improve the performance of the units; the multiple unit operational coordination partner, which is one of the big boys who is essentially running multiple units; and then the last one is the asset investor, which is somebody who's running multiple units and is investing in the size of the fleet. And so that was kind of the customer types, and each of those customers is going to require different things and have different behaviors. So then I was like, all right, so so in my mind, the highest base rate should be paid by this bare bones asset leaser, right? And they should have the shortest payment terms, right? And then everybody else should have lower pay rates, and we should own. So I think, right now in the industry, there seems to be like net 45 is just a straight up given. I don't think it needs to be a given. I mean, I think that I think philosophically we want to reward customers with a net 45 payment terms, but at a bare bones asset lease, your payment terms are 15, right?
Well, I mean, the whole reason for automation of systems for accounts payable and accounts receivable was to narrow that payment term, and we're at a point where we should be able to do that and effectively expect reasonable payment times because of it.
Yeah.
So I agree with what you've done there.
Okay. So how did I get to this initial bare bones base day rate? That I did from a kind of a value.
There you go. So So this page is where all my questions. When I said I had questions, this page is where I'm at. So
all right. So how did I get there? So what I said is, the model I said is, well, let's model this day rate as the value for the customer earned, right? Which is, so currently, based on some of the things that were in the slides you gave me, somebody might expect to pay these day rates on the base, the pressure control unit, and the crane, which is, about $21,000 per day. And, the assumption is, well, let's say, all right, we'll give you, a 30% discount on the costs that we're replacing, essentially, and say, all right, because we're replacing all the costs, and we'll underprice that by 30% for the cost of replacing rather than overprice it, because we want people to want to do it because it's less expensive. And I can easily change that number.
We're replacing.
Yeah.
Well, but what on the Gen 1 units, what we'll be replacing is wireline pressure control system and wireline crane.
Okay. Got it. All right. So the base is still there. All right. That's good to know. Okay. And then the other assumption there was that at the beginning, you would, so let's say you take that part you're replacing, say we're going to give a 30% discount on that, and then the downtime cost removed. So this is kind of a gain shares. Let's assume that if we reduce 30%, or do you reduce a certain amount of downtime costs in a 14-day job, say 30% downtime or $30,000 in downtime, that we argue that there should be a 10% benefit share on that improvement, right? Which is an assumption. So that gets you to a value-based core day rate, like a beginning day rate of this 8,000 here, right? And so that'll change, and we'll
book price. I like that. That's a solid book price right there.
Okay. And so let's come over here. So now I'm going to have to update it a little. It's because I made a lot of assumptions around that number. So let's take a different one. Go ahead.
So understand, we're not going to get into. In the Gen, we will probably displace at some point in time in the later generational units where we'll actually mount or have a framed wireline reel there. So that we don't have, so it can be a complete rental package. But in the first Gen units, we don't want to displace wireline companies.
Okay, that's fair. That's good. That's a good to know. Like I said, I want to make sure we're understanding that. So we
actually want wireline companies to be our clients, just like EMPs.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. All right. So let's do a little changing here. So power by the hour, and this is an assumption here, because if somebody really wanted power by the hour, then that uptime assumption really begins to matter. But I'll start, just put it relatively close right now. And then same thing. If somebody wants power by the hour, then we'll come back and look at that later. So
on the other aspect, one of the aspects, when you go back over to the downtime calculation you put in there, what we have impacted significantly is the value add of that truck and personnel.
Okay.
In other words, there's no longer any downtime for those individuals because we've eliminated it because we've eliminated the crane downtime.
Okay. So is there a way to quantify that?
Well, whatever you have, that's the slides that I gave you is what was, accounting for that.
Mm-hmm.
We were actually trying to say we would save you this much money because we're making your wireline people more effective and efficient, and the uptime is going to be significantly greater.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, your downtime costs are being greatly reduced because we've eliminated.
No, I agree. I'm just trying to find a way. And like I said, this was just a value-based.
That's what I'm saying. So trying to figure out what that would be, I think you've done it with your value-based core pay rate, but have you incorporated in that the value of the uptime of the actual wireline truck and personnel?
No.
Is that in there?
No. Is there a way to quantify that? Or is there a better way to quantify that?
I thought we had done that in the slides that well, it's right there, yes. Yeah, but you haven't incorporated in that number is not the uptime of the personnel.
So I picked, and these are the tables you had in the slides that I pulled here. So I did pick a number. So I guess what number would you like me to put in as the base of sort of the cost avoided here, or the non-productive time? Like, because you had highlighted 1%, you highlighted 2%. Which one do you want me to put in?
The 1% I think is sufficient for right now for what we're trying to do.
Okay.
But I mean, you kind of see what I'm talking about there.
I agree. Like I said, I see what you're talking about, and I'm not trying to say it's wrong. I'm just trying to find a way to quantify it in a way that is.
The reason why I want it in there is because it is a significant number. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we're not displacing that at this point in time in our business model, displacing that wireline truck and personnel.
That's fair.
So the only thing we're displacing is on that wireline crane. That's one thing you need to. Did we have in there the crane operator? Is that crane plus operator? I thought that was just a crane.
Let's see. Yeah. So I pulled it from this number here, wireline crane, from this table.
Okay. So, and that's true. That's kind of the average on the wireline cranes. We need to make sure that we have the crane operator, because crane operators will run you about 800 to 1,000 a day.
Okay.
So there would be a greater number, because you got to have a specialized person to do that.
Okay.
Certified, and that's basically all he does on location. He operates a crane.
Okay. Got it. All right. And so, how much should we claim a benefit share of the downtime costs removed? Is it 15%? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? It's kind of we don't need to answer this now. I'll get it sort of right.
That's probably something we need to come to consensus on.
Okay.
I mean, we will eliminate 100% of the downtime associated with weather and issues around the crane. Mm-hmm. But how we then translate that into the value share of that of what we've brought to the table is that's kind of a perception issue.
Well, and that's always so. This is all a thought experiment, right? This is not me trying to price it.
No, you're right.
This is just me coming up with some assumptions so that we can price it, right?
Right.
And so, and to get to because the whole goal is so what I did here, the other things I did is I tried to lay out in my mind for each customer type what the things that, like, who's going to be accountable for idle asset storage, who's going to be, for each type of customer, who's going to be accountable for these type of things. Right now, these don't drive any numbers. They were just me trying to think through, what might be in a different type of customer.
It's your decision matrix that you were following.
Yeah. So like I said, it was just, so this is the only thing driving the calculation in here right now. So I manually entered these, right? And based on the fact that, hey, we want the people who are our partners should get a discount. The people who are, running multiple fleets, who are trading data with us, we want to incentivize people to want to, sort of collaborate with us from an engineering and from a data standpoint. And so these are all changeable. The only other so this was just me thinking through in my mind, and we can come back and talk about this later. But what I essentially did was I said, okay, let's assume, let's get to a base day rate. Let's apply a payment terms impact. So essentially, this means that somebody who has 45 payment terms is effectively getting a discount, right? Because they're getting net 45. So I'm modeling the impact of payment terms into the revenue calculation as opposed to trying to do it later. And that was just something to remind myself, among others, that the payment terms matter, right?
Right.
And then I assumed in this number might be significantly higher. You know, there would be some day rate discount for the people who are helping us finance the assets. I put it at 15%. It could be some other thing. The thing that I actually wanted to get your input on is, so one of the key assumptions here is how much of our operations would fall into each of these customer behaviors, right? How many? So I put, you know, very generic assumptions here, but in your mind, if you could put a percentage of the total customer base that would be in each of these types of behaviors, you know, what would you think the goal would be? Would it be to have, you know, 20% of the customer revenue be related to these big ass investors, and 20% for the big coordination partners? So essentially 40% of revenue with the big boys, or how would you describe the target customer composition?
Well, so let's look at our first 10 units, and I'm not going to say that will represent what we have as, you know, division of customer base going forward, but our first 10 units, we are pretty well assured that EOG is going to want the first 3 of those 10 units for their business.
Okay.
And they'll probably put them on a long-term agreement.
Okay.
And we'll just go from there. One of the other clients that's very interested in this is Centennial.
Okay.
And Centennial is not quite as active as EOG, but so they'll probably really want a data and engineering collaborator with the bare bones assets. So it'd be a combination of those two.
Okay.
And so they'll probably look at 1 to 2 units max out of those 10.
Okay.
And then what that'll leave us with is, we'll say 5 additional units out of those 10 to go to other client types. So I can see Chevron jumping on this pretty quick, Shell jumping on it pretty quick, and, you know, potentially ExxonMobil. I'd like to maybe each one of them get a unit to start off with, so that'd be 1 unit per them. Chevron probably the greatest growth area that we have out of those 3 off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll limit them to 1 each because I just want them to get a taste. And then probably 1 for Concho and 1 for Diamondback.
Okay.
Is the way I would look at it.
Okay. And so it sounds like, you know, we see. Go ahead.
But when you look at those 3 of the big boys, they're going to want long term.
Okay.
And the Concho and Diamondback will probably be bare bone asset lease type deal.
Yeah, well, that does seem like Concho's style.
It sort of is. I mean, if they have something they like and they want to secure it, they'll kind of invest, but otherwise.
Okay, so do we think? So is it a good assumption, and I'll add a little coloring here, that so we'd say that 40% of our customer base should be in these multi-unit operational coordinations, so kind of people with longer term leases. And then the next highest 30% are bare bones, and maybe 10% of the other types assumed for now.
Yeah, and then there's one other thing that you need to really put in here that I think would be as far as a customer type,
okay.
And that would be a multiple unit per location. There's a huge push to do multi-wells stages. So in other words, at the same time, to simul-frac 2 wells.
Okay.
Which will require 2 units. Right now, they're having to do it with 2 cranes, 2 wireline companies. And so what they do is they rig up 1 frac spread, but they'll prepare and have the same design for 2 wells on the same pad.
Okay.
And so that will require, and the reason why I'm saying that is because Centennial is kind of driving that bus right now. And that's why I said they would probably need 2 units.
Mm-hmm.
because they're doing a simulfrac deal. And I think there's been a lot of interest in that. In fact, I've already seen 4 or 5 different articles on it. But I don't know how successful it is, but it's basically making the use of horsepower even cheaper if possible.
How would that really be from a financial standpoint? Would we, from a revenue assumption, they would still, if they're hiring 2 units, they would just be then paying for 2 units instead of 1 and potentially getting a volume discount, but it wouldn't really change. I mean, they wouldn't get 2 for the price of 1, right?
No. Basically, the reason I want to put that in there is because it's consuming more units than what we would have planned for otherwise.
Okay.
In other words, what we would look at from a modeling perspective on consumption of our units, 1 unit per pad.
Yep.
And if I've got, for example, so it would tie to horsepower in that regard. I'd be able to say, all right, I got 80 frac crews running. That means I've got potential having 80 units out there. But in this concept, if I've got 80 frac crews running and half of those are doing simulfracs, now I've got my market now goes from 80 to 120.
No, you're right. That's fair. And I think
that's kind of what I'm looking at. So yeah, I guess it would be in the assumptions part more than anything.
No, it's okay. And like I said, that we can talk that one we can definitely talk about because the market assumptions, but that is something is not directly related to this calculation, but it's definitely material as we get forward. So all that to say is that gets me to something I can use to project revenue based on the number of units, right? And it's just a starting point.
Right.
All right. And so and then the reason I put this thing here is this is just kind of trying to help me think through the behaviors of the customer types, because in the end, and the reason I'll come back to this a lot is because every single one of these activities drives cost for somebody, right? And so I don't want us doing stuff we're not getting paid for or without us deciding intentionally to do that. And the other problem, as you know, with a lot of oilfield services companies is they do a lot of stuff that they don't get paid for, right? And they do it just because it's always been done that way or, odds and ends. So I just want to keep in mind that the different customer behaviors are going to drive them to expect different things. And we have to think about the pricing based on all the different things we're doing or potentially doing in a situation, and because each of these things is going to drive costs for us.
Well, at one point in time, performance pricing was there, like you say, and because they saw it as a differentiator, we can bring more to the table. Mm-hmm. But as we gotten further and further down this commodities market pricing, that has had less and less of an impact on decision making, and therefore
may not be a differentiator, and it may not be important. Yeah.
Exactly, but more importantly, it's still cost you thrown in there, and you're really not getting any. But it's an expectation because now you've established.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, these are things that as we get into commercialization, we can talk about it. This is just me trying to think through it. Okay, so that gets me to a revenue assumption, which is we're hopefully getting it more reasonable. And so that was helpful. And like I'll send you back at this because I've been editing this as we go along. Right. So the reason obviously I'm doing this is to validate, what does the net income look like, at the core, and what does the free cash flow look like. And so that's what we're doing. So obviously I want to get to a point where we're making positive cash flow. Because right now, the assumption I have in there, cash flow is negative until 2023, which is I don't think what we want. And so I'm gonna go in and validate this and come back and put it together. But I think, for us, it's the capital expenditures aspect. So right now, as I look at this, what I'm beginning to see is obviously one, the revenue and operational expense assumptions are material, right? there's a lot of income taxes. I made some simplifying assumptions, but the most material aspect of this is, as we know, balancing, pricing and revenue with the speed of the capital plan, right? Because if we build at the rate that I put in right now, it's obviously, burning a lot of cash early on before revenue catches up to it. And so, like I said, we don't need to solve this right now, but I think this is kind of the discussion I want to have as we're going through this. Is let's make sure we're getting all the assumptions aligned with your kind of back of the envelope stuff to figure out what does the big picture look like, and get us to a point where there's positive cash flow in 2021 overall, and then going forward.
So are these numbers that you're assuming down here, are those annualized? I mean, you basically.
And this is annual. So
yes, annualized. Right?
Yeah, this is annual. So this is 2020, 21, 22, 23, just 4 years.
Okay.
And this is updated with all the changes we just made. So good news is when we talk through this, it flows through. And like I said, there's some placeholders here. There's some big assumptions. So right now, as I said, the income is looking okay, from a profitability standpoint. But this, the capital expenditures and the free cash flow right now are something I want to make sure I'm calculating correctly. Right? And that's London.
Yeah. Well, that's where I need to have that discussion with you, because I want to grasp how you've come up with those things.
Well, for the adding up, it's relatively simple. Which the capital expenditures
right. But your assumptions, I want to see what your assumptions are, because you've thrown in a lot more detail, which that's the reason why you're looking at this, because it needs to be a more correct assumption. Mm-hmm. When I do just straight line calculations and look at the high end and low of my assumptions, I'm actually seeing within 3/4 of commercialization, I'm seeing where we have revenue that outstrips our expenditures. In other words,
that is true.
Like your trajectory. Okay.
Yeah, I have that right now. So right now, I'm saying you're okay. We're the same. All right. Yeah, so we're saying that net income is positive in 2021, right? So within 2 to 3 quarters, I'm with you. And that's obviously that's based revenue less expenditures. But yes, EBITDA is positive in 2021.
I'm with you.
The question is, how do we get the cash flow positive, right?
Right.
And that has a lot to do with because capital obviously impacts free cash flow, and obviously depreciation does a little bit, but depreciation and capital are connected. And so I'm going to continue to work through this, but just so you know where the capital expenditure number is coming from, I mean, really the capital expenditures are the cost per unit of every unit we build. And that assumption was the assumption you kind of gave me, essentially $380,000 per unit for every unit is built. And then so basically I model each month we're building X number of units, and that is translated into a new capital expenditure. And then capital repairs, which is the other one I'm going to work through, which is, if you're assuming we're doing this amount of lubricator and hydraulic system replacement per month, those are capital repairs, and that's a capital expenditure. And so assuming
380,000, just out of curiosity, because this is one quick way to validate what you've done versus what I've done. $380,000 cost, and assuming that unit immediately goes on to a lease from the day that we pull it out of manufacturing. How many days on lease does it need to become cash flow positive?
I don't know, but I can find out.
I knew that you could. So I'm just going to throw that by you just to kind of see if what you come up with is close to what I came up with.
Okay. That is a calculation that can be done. And just so you know, so we can norm it up. So right now the capital expenditures in year with the current, so the idea is that in 2020 potentially 3 units are completed, 21 66, 22 156, 23 24 units completed. So this top line here for units completed, and I'll send you back this sheet so you can look at it. The new capital expenditure, right? Not capital repairs, but just new capital expenditures in 2021 would be about $25 million. In 2022 would be about $60 million. In 2023 would be about $9 million. So it is material, right? That speed of that build plan is material, because if that build plan, because that's one of the core assumptions right now, is the speed of this build plan. And so that is one of the things right now that's driving that early cash flow, is this capital expenditures in 2021 model. And that doesn't mean, like I said, in 2021 you have to spend $25 million. That means let's get to a plan that's sustainable and doing better, getting paid faster. Great, more cash to spend on capital. But if we're not, we don't want to start with a plan that doesn't have positive cash flow. How's that?
No, I mean, it's all about cash. And we've got to make sure that we generate the cash flow, because number one, we don't let all that. Number two, our investors will not be.
Well, no, I mean, I think, as you said, I think the tolerance in the industry for negative cash flow is probably over. So we're gonna have to show a good, and obviously you said there's an argument to be made early in startup, but definitely I think our goal should be to have overall positive cash flow in 2021, right, as an overall annual number, even if that comes late in the year.
Well, I agree. So that's the reason why I'm trying to. I would like to know if we did this on a per unit. If you can give me a number on a per unit basis, then that tells us what we need to do to speed up or slow down. I mean, off the top of my head, I can visualize that.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, I'll work on that. Okay, so that's it. And so I'll put together.
That's what I'm going off of right now. On a per unit basis, if I'm at the low end of my CapEx estimate, then at 75 days, I can see, and if it's on only 75 days, will that meet positive cash flow on that year?
Okay.
And if I'm at the high end, then it moves up to about 100 days.
Okay. All right.
That's kind of what, using just basic assumptions I came up with.
Yep.
I'd like to see if what you got here drives that same positive cash flow numbers.
Okay, well, we'll do that, and yeah, that's fair. And then, like I said, we'll put it together and we'll see what the balance sheet and the shareholders' equity and all the fun things that the investors are going to want to look at some point. But
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and this sooner or later, I mean, we're at that point. This is the month in which I'm engaged equity investors. So prior to this, it's really only been friends and family. So we're talking about pursuing the investment strategy and those, that's targeting that group, that audience.
Yeah, gotta speak to everyone in a language they understand. All right. Well, I got to run, but I'll continue to chew on this, and like I said, I'll send you the version we had here after our discussion, and you continue to kind of poke and prod at it and look at it and send questions along, and we'll go from there.
No, this is great. I appreciate you doing this. I love it.
Yeah, it's all good.
It's really putting your thoughts in what we're going to have to do. So, I can see that visualization in every one of these sheets that you've done. So I like that.
It's all got to work, right? It's in the end, if the numbers don't add up, then it's problematic for many people. So.
Well, it is, and I know that if the numbers don't add up, then I won't be able to get you involved in this venture. So we got to make the numbers add up.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you for your time, sir.
You're the number one fan, or critic. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, like I said, there's no more important the critic than the guy who signs the books. So
that's it.
Yeah.
So right now, your preliminary thoughts. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking if we can. So I think it's solid. I'm thinking if we, obviously, as I said, the first model you build is always wrong, and so if we can get if we can validate the build plan, the capital build plan, and the sustainability of that, and make sure that schedule makes sense, then I think it's. Obviously the overall numbers are viable, right? It's a good business. It's a positive cash flow, positive income business within 2 years. Hell, 5 years ago, the fact that it was cash flow negative for 2 to 3 years wouldn't have bothered anybody, right? What I'm trying to do is adjust the sensibilities to our new world of investors, which is oilfield services is going to happen. These are going to have to be lean, mean, and cash flow positive from the beginning. And so I think like I said, it's not, once we can kind of smooth these down and get them to the closest estimate we have, it'll drive the right conversations for us, because I don't see the role of the CFO as being the person who's just there to do accounting, right? This is about making sure that we have the financial drivers to drive the best operational behavior, right? And making sure we have all the information we need to have those discussions about, okay, let's think about how often we're rebuilding lubricators, or how often we're doing these hydraulic overhauls, and make our design decisions so that every cost engineering decision, every design decision, every operational decision has cost implications. And you and I both know that a lot of executives out there in the oil field, they just kind of make the best call they can, but they don't really have a full understanding at the time of exactly what the implication of every decision is. My goal is that we as an executive team